Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Drawing Down the Dragon. I'm Snappy, and thank you for joining me for our evening adoration to the Muses. And we cry out in loving adoration to the Great Mother, the twins, and the Muses, the one duality in generation. And we ask the Muses to sing in us the songs of inspiration, to guide us in our daily wanderings, and to teach us to listen and perceive with reasoned clarity. Thank you all for joining me on such a lovely evening. Peace and love. Great to be with you all. Let's give a shout out here to our chat. Much love, Hannah. Such a pleasure to see you. Graham, things in my chest. Much love. Constellation, much love. I got that dragon from a manuscript, a medieval manuscript online. I'd have to double check exactly which one, but it's from a 11th century illumination text. I have like gigabytes of artwork. I'm just a huge nerd for all this stuff. I'd have to go searching. But thank you so much for your support, Constellation. Right? It is of the constellation Draco. So if you search Constellation Draco, medieval illumination, it may just pop up in Google. Right? Christy, much love. Virgie, much love. Kitty, much love. Honeybee, much love. Veldane, much love. Leslie, much love. Hupomeno, much love. Dragon Luna, much love. All right. Such a pleasure to be with you all. It's been kind of a wild ride. I had taken a bit of a vacation. We went to Chicago to see Junius and Dr. Amin Hillman. It was a wild, 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 incredible time. I got to meet so many beautiful people from the online community. Some of my closest friends, in fact, I have never met Dion in person, and we had the pleasure of actually meeting, and we're such best friends now. Same thing with my dear friend Fish and with Banvi, people in the community who I've known now for 5 years. Really, really powerful stuff. So I'm just still on cloud nine from that experience, but I'm also, if you can't hear it in my throat here, I'm still recovering from going to Chicago. So bear with me tonight. So we're trying to make the best of it. I'm still in recovery. But life is beautiful. We're here to celebrate the Muses. All right. And let's begin with our magical prayers. We're going to start today, as we always do, with the prayer to Celine for any spell from the PGM. Oops. What's going on? There we go. All right. The prayer to Celine. Come to me, O beloved mistress, three-faced Celine. Kindly hear my sacred chants, night's ornament, young, bringing light to mortals. O child of morn who ride upon fierce bulls, O queen who drive your car on equal course with Helios, who with the triple forms of triple graces dance and revel with the stars. Your justice and the Moira's threads, Clotho and Lachesis and Atropos, three-headed, your Persephone, Megara, Alecto, many-formed, who arm your hands with dreaded murky lamps, who shake your locks of fearful serpents on your brow, who sound the roar of bulls out from your mouths, whose womb is decked out with the scales of creeping things, with poisonous rows of serpents down the back, bound down your backs with horrifying chains, night crier, bull-faced, loving solitude, bull-headed, you have eyes of bulls, the voice of dogs. You hide your forms in shanks of lions. Your ankle is wolf-shaped. Fierce dogs are dear to you. Wherefore they call you Hecate, many-named Mene, cleaving air just like dart shooter Artemis, Persephone, shooter of deer, night-shining, triple-sounding, triple-headed, triple-voiced, Selene, triple-pointed, triple-faced, triple-necked, and goddess of the triple ways, who hold untiring flaming fire in triple baskets, and you who oft frequent the triple way and rule the triple decades, unto me whom calling you be gracious, and with kindness give heed, you who protect the spacious world at night, before whom daimons quake in fear, and gods immortal tremble. Goddess who exalt men, you of many names, who bear fair offspring, bull-eyed, horned mother of gods and men, and nature, mother of all things, for you frequent Olympus, and the broad and boundless chasm you traverse. Beginning and end are you, and you alone rule all. For all things are from you, and in you do all things, Eternal One, come to their end. As everlasting band around your temples, you wear great Kronos' chains, unbreakable and unremovable, and you hold in your hands a golden scepter. Letters round your scepter Kronos wrote himself and gave to you to wear, that all things stay steadfast. Subduer and subdued, mankind subduer, and force subduer, chaos too you rule. Ararakarara Ephiscere. Hail, goddess, and attend your epithets. I burn for you this spice, O child of Zeus, dart shooter, heavenly one, goddess of harbors who roam the mountains, goddess of crossroads, O nether and nocturnal and infernal, goddess of dark, quiet, and frightful one, O you who have your meal amid the graves, night, darkness, broad chaos, necessity, hard to escape are you, your Moira and Erinyes, torment justice and destroyer, and you keep Cerberus in chains. With scales of serpents are you dark, O you with hair of serpents, serpent girded, who drink blood, who bring death and destruction, and who feast on hearts. Flesh eater, who devour those dead untimely, and you who make grief resound and spread madness. Come to my sacrifices, and now for me do you fulfill this matter. Hail Artemis, hail Hecate, hail Selene. Beautiful stuff. All right, and next up, our next prayer is the hymn to Helios. The hymn to Helios. Hearken, king of Noeric fire, Titan holding the golden bridle. Hearken, dispenser of light, you, O Lord, who hold yourself the key to the life-supporting source and channel off from above a rich stream of harmony into the material worlds. Hearken, for you, being above the middlemost seat of Aether and in possession of the very brilliant disk, the heart of the cosmos, have filled everything with your intellect awakening providence. The planets, girded with your ever-blooming torches, through unceasing and untiring dances, always send life-producing drops down for earthlings. Under the influence of your chariot's returning courses, everything that is born has sprouted up according to the ordinance of the seasons. The din of the elements clashing with each other stopped once you appeared from your unspeakable begetter. For you, the unshakable choir of the Moirai has yielded. Back again they wind the thread of compelling destiny when you wish it. For all around you dominate, all around you rule by force. From your chain, the king of the song that obeys the divine, Phoebus, has sprung forth. Singing inspired songs to the accompaniment of the kithara, he calms the great wave of deep, roaring becoming. From your evil averting band that imparts pleasant gifts, Paean sprouted, and he imposed his health by filling the wide cosmos with harmony wholly devoid of harm. People honor you in hymns as the famous father of Dionysus, and again some praise you in songs as Eus Attis in the extreme depths of matter, whereas others praise you as pretty Adonis. The thread of your swift whip holds fears for the wild-tempered daimons, noxious to men, who prepare evil for our miserable souls, in order that forever in the gulf of heavy resounding fire they suffer once they have fallen under the yoke of the body, with the result that they forget the bright shining court of the lofty Father. But you, the best of gods, crowned with fire, blessed daimon, image of the all-creating God, uplifter of souls, hearken and always purify me every fault. Receive my tearful supplication. Pull me out of baneful defilement and keep me far from the punishing deities while mollifying the swift eye of justice that sees all. May you always, through your evil averting help, give holy light rich with blessings to my soul. Once you have scattered the man-destroying poisonous mist, and to my body fitness and gift bestowing health, bring me to glory, that in accord with the traditions of my forefathers, I may cultivate the gifts of the Muses with pretty locks. Give me, if you so wish, Lord, unshakable bliss, as a reward for lovely piety. You perfect all things easily, for you have the power and infinite might. And if some ill comes my way through the threads moved by the stars, from the spindles of destiny that revolve in the helices, ward it off yourself with your mighty radiance. Hail Helios, hail Apollo, hail Zeus Amon. Beautiful stuff. All right. We have two more short prayers to get through here. Next up, we have the Orphic Hymn to the Muses, the Athanascus translation. Daughters of Memnosine, daughters of thundering Zeus, Pierian Muses, renowned and illustrious, many-shaped and beloved, of the mortals you visit, you give birth to unblemished virtue in every discipline. You nourish the soul, you set thought aright, as you become leaders, as you become mistresses of the mind's power. Sacred and mystic rites you taught to mortals. Clio, Euterpe, Talia, Melpomene, Terpsichore, Orato, Polymnia, Urania, and Mother Calliope, mighty goddess Hagni, do come to the initiates, O goddesses, in your manifold holiness, do bring glory and emulation that is lovely and sung by many. Hail the Muses. And our final prayer, the hymn to the Lares by Tibullus. Lares, gods of my fathers, preserve me. While young and still nursing, you guided me when I played at your feet. Let none profane your antique images, rough-hewn wooden statues set upon altars of upturned sod, then dwelled among our grandfathers. In those days, humble reverence provided you with sweet honey alone. You stayed in meager shrines made of twigs. In tattered robes, the gods were pleased with offerings of grapes and wreaths of wheat set upon carved heads. Granted his wish, a man would bring you honey cakes and set his virgin daughters to attend your little shrines. Lares, turn away from us those who scheme against us with their bronze weapons. Hail the Lares, hail the Daimons. Beautiful. All right, and that ends it for our magical prayers this evening. And we're going to dive deep into our short story readings. And I know it's been a little bit because of the vacation, but those of you who have been following along, we've been diving deep into this wonderful book, The Book of Imaginary Beings by Jorge Luis Borges. And this is sort of a magical bestiary of imaginary and mythological creatures from across history, culture, and literature. Really fun read. And we left off last time with the Valkyries. So we're going to dive in here. And there's only a few more passages in this book, and then we've completed it, read all of the mythical, magical entries. So we're going to finish up the book today. We're going to begin here with Valkyries. So what does Borges have to tell us about the Valkyries? Valkyrie means in early German languages, the chooser of the slain. We do not know how the people of Germany and of Austria imagine them. In Norse mythology, they are lovely maidens who bear weapons. Their usual number was 3, though in the Eddas, the names of more than a dozen are given. In popular myth, they took the souls of those slain in battle and brought them to Odin's epic paradise. There in the hall of the slain, Valhalla, whose ceiling was of gold and was lighted by drawn swords and not lamps, the warriors battled from daybreak to sunset. Then those of them who had been killed were brought back to life, and all shared a divine feast in which they were served the meat of an immortal wild boar, and inexhaustible horns of mead. This idea of an endless battle seems to be Celtic in origin. An Anglo-Saxon charm against the pain of sudden stitches describes the Valkyries without naming them. The lines, as translated by Stopford a brook run this way. Loud were they, low, loud, as over the land they rode. Fierce of heart were they, as over the hill they rode. For the mighty maidens have mustered up their strength. Under the spreading influence of Christianity, the name Valkyrie degenerated. In medieval England, a judge had burned at the stake an unlucky woman charged with being a Valkyrie. That is to say, a witch. Wow, wow, wow. Valkyries become synonymous with witches. Wow, wild stuff. Interesting. Let's continue. Next up, we have the Western dragon. A tall, standing, heavy serpent with claws and wings is perhaps the description that best fits the dragon. It may be black, but it is essential that it is also be shining. Equally essential is it that it belch forth fire and smoke. The above description refers, of course, to its present image. The Greeks seem to have applied the name dragon to any considerable reptile. Pliny informs us that in summer the dragon craves elephant blood, which is notably cool. It will make a sudden foray on the elephant, coil around it, and plunge its teeth into it. The bloodless elephant rolls on the ground and dies. So does the dragon, crushed under the weight of its victim. We also read that Ethiopian dragons, in search of better pasturage, regularly cross the Red Sea and migrate to Arabia. To accomplish this, 4 or 5 dragons coil together and form a kind of craft, with their heads lifted out of the water. In Pliny, there is also a chapter devoted to remedies derived from the dragon. Here we read that its eyes, dried and then stirred with honey, make a liniment that is effective against nightmares. The fat of the dragon's heart, stored in the hide of a gazelle, and tied to the arm with the sinews of a stag, assures success in litigation. Dragon teeth, also bound to the body, ensure the indulgence of masters and the mercy of kings. With some skepticism, Pliny cites a preparation that renders man invincible. It is concocted of the skin of a lion's marrow, the froth of a horse which has just won a race, the nails of a dog, and the tail and head of a dragon. In the 11th book of the Iliad, we read that there was a blue, 3-headed dragon on Agamemnon's shield. Centuries later, Norse pirates painted dragons on their shields and carved dragon heads on the prows of their long ships. Among the Romans, the dragon was the insignia of the cohort, as the eagle was of the legion. This is the origin of present-day dragoons. On the standards of the Saxon kings of England, there were dragons. The object of such images was to impart fear to enemy ranks. In the ballad of Aethus, we read, "This was what the Romans used to bear, this which makes us so feared." In the West, the dragon was also thought of as evil, one of the stock exploits of heroes. Hercules, Sigurd, Saint Michael, Saint George, was to overcome and slay a dragon. In Germanic myth, the dragon kept watch over precious objects. And so in Beowulf, written in England in the 7th or 8th century, there is a dragon that stands guard over a treasure for some 300 years. A runaway slave hides in its lair and steals a cup. On waking, the dragon notices the theft and resolves to kill the thief, but every once in a while goes back inside to make sure the cup has not been merely mislaid. How strange of the poet to attribute to his monster so human a misgiving. The dragon begins to ravage the kingdom. Beowulf searches it out, grapples with it, and kills it, dying himself soon after from a mortal wound inflicted by the dragon's tusks. People believed in the reality of the dragon. In the middle of the 16th century, the dragon is recorded in Conrad Gessner's Historia Animalium, a work of a scientific nature. Time has notably worn away the dragon's prestige. We believe in the lion as reality and symbol. We believe in the minotaur as symbol, but no longer as reality. The dragon is perhaps the best known, but also the least fortunate of fantastic animals. It seems childish to us and usually spoils the stories in which it appears. It is worth remembering, however, that we are dealing with a modern prejudice due perhaps to a surefit of dragons and fairy tales. In the Revelations, St. John speaks twice of the dragon, that old serpent called the devil and Satan. In the same spirit, St. Augustine writes that the devil is lion and dragon, lion for its rage, dragon for its cunning. Young observes that in the dragon are the reptile and the bird, the elements of earth and air. Oh, wow. Lots there, right? One thing that we see that Borges doesn't get to, which is unfortunate because it adds a lot of depth to the idea of the dragon. And I don't know why he doesn't mention it because he is a classical scholar and he knows some Greek, so he must have come across this. But for those of us who are familiar with the Greco-Roman tradition, sometimes the dragon is a serpent, it's a monster, and sometimes it's a temple guardian, right? Sometimes it's a human being, and that this is a mythical attribute of a human. We see that applied in many different places, right? The dragons that are said to be protecting the temple along with Medusa, right? The dragon who is guarding the golden fleece. There's, some sources that talk about it being a man, just as they talk about the fleece itself being the skin of a man. There's a lot of magic going on in these stories, right? Remember, on Circe's magical island, all of the animals are people, right? In the great play, The Alexandra, the serpent dragon is Clytemnestra, right? The dragon in that poem is Clytemnestra, the woman. She's also Echidna, the mother of monsters. They use all of these titles to refer to certain types of empowered people. So there's a lot of magic going on, right? So when we get to this idea of the dragoon, these protective guardians, to me, that doesn't seem as like disconnected from the original dragon idea as it first would appear. And he does also reference to the Roman standard. The Romans used to have the dragon standard that they would carry into battle, and it was this special type. Often they were made of wood, sometimes they were made of fabric, but there were this serpent standard that when they were held up, they would howl. They would howl as the Romans charged into battle, and these would be terrifying and would induce fear. And so by the time you get to the Middle Ages, you see so many different groups with these dragon standards as ways to terrify the enemy. And often they made sound. Sometimes they would even light fires on them so they would breathe fire and have fireworks and firecrackers, you know? Anyway, the dragon stuff is so fun. As you guys know, my title, the name of my channel is named after the dragon. So there's so much depth to this image. And I'm glad too that he got into the satanic stuff, right? One of the things too, if we're going to take the dragon into the realm of the tarot, in some of the earliest tarot decks, we have the image of Heracles conquering the dragon, sometimes conquering the lion. But these, I argue, the lion and the dragon, at least in the tarot, are being used in a similar way, right? And but there's a magical shift that occurs. So in the earliest version, you have Heracles, right, dominating the beast and destroying it, right? But then the tarot shifts, and you get the maiden who humbles the beast, who domesticates the beast, who removes the thorn from the lion's paw, who rides upon the beast, right? And so there's a different kind of strength there, a different kind of magic, a reformation, right? This references all of these Beauty and the Beast type myths that we see occur again and again, where the divine feminine transforms the abductor, the abuser into defender, right? Wild, wild power there. For a modern example of this, we see this still carrying on in modern fantasy, right? The famous character Daenerys from A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, is following that same classic archetype, riding dragons too, no less. Right? But she domesticates Khal Drogo with the power of love, right? And this is the thing, you can wield two types of strength. You can destroy the lion, or you can make the lion your guardian, or the dragon the same. You can destroy the dragon, or you can make the dragon your guardian. Wild stuff to think on. So fun. All right, let's continue. Okay, this is interesting. Uwarki. Uwarki. In his short history of English literature, Saintsbury finds the flying girl Uwarki, one of the most charming heroines of the 18th century novel, half woman and half bird, or as Browning was to write of his dead wife, Elizabeth Barrett, half angel and half bird. She can open her arms and make wings of them, and a silky dawn covers her body. She lives on an island lost in Antarctic seas and was discovered there by Peter Wilkins, a shipwrecked sailor who marries her. Uwarki is a Gari, or flying woman, and belongs to a race of flying people known as Glums. Wilkins converts them to Christianity, and after the death of his wife, succeeds in making his way back to England. The story of this strange love affair may be read in the novel Peter Wilkins by Robert Paltic. Oh, wow, that's a weird one. Interesting. Uwarki. And I find this part just shocking. Browning calls his wife, Elizabeth Barrett, calls her a Uwarki, a half woman, half bird. You know, Elizabeth Barrett Browning is one of the greatest poets who ever lived. Like that woman is beyond incredible. And definitely someone who understood the magic. So, in some ways, a dragon herself. Definitely half bird, this lady. Everyone should check out Elizabeth Barrett if you want to be blown away. Wow, that's cool. All right, let's continue. Zaratan. Zaratan. Yeah, right. I should have said that, Veldane. The half woman, half bird, the siren, right? Taking us to that Legea magic. Oh, wow, wow, wow. Interesting stuff, right? Sirens are so powerful. And of course, we see in Odysseus with the sirens, right? He has to confront his greatest fear, to perceive it, but not be overcome by it, to witness and move on, to understand and to know, to see from the distance and to hear that empowered song, that purity of desire, right? Wild, wild stuff there. You know, Odysseus straps himself to the mast upon the cross. And we would see this image. This is something that I always found striking is that you see these pendants of Odysseus on the mast facing the sirens. And they used to be worn in the same way that you see later crucifixes worn with Jesus. No coincidences in my book. All right, let's read about this guy, the Tsar Ratan. Zaratan, right? What does Borges have to tell us here? There is one story that has ranged the whole geography and all epochs, the tale of mariners who land on an unknown island, which then sinks into the sea and drowns them because it is a living creature. This invention is found in the first voyage of Sinbad and in Canto 4, stanza 37 of Orlando Furioso's Cella sia una isoletta si credemo. We believed it, the whale, to be a small island. In the Irish legend of Saint Brendan, and in the Greek bestiary of Alexandria, in the Historia de Gentibus Septentrinalibus, excuse me, by the Swedish ecclesiastic Olaus Magnus, and in this passage from the opening of Paradise Lost, in which Satan, stretched out huge in length, is comparable to a whale, him haply slumbering on the Norway foam, the pilot of some small night foundered skiff, deeming some island off, as seamen tell, with fixed anchor in his scaly rind, moors by his side under the lee, while night invests the sea. Paradoxically, one of the earliest versions of the legend gives it in order to refute it. This is recorded in the Book of Animals by Al-Jazir, the 9th century Muslim zoologist. We translate its words from the Spanish version by Miguel Asin Palacios. As for the Zaratan, I never met anyone who actually saw it with his own eyes. There are sailors who assert that they have drawn alongside certain sea islands, seeing wooded valleys and crevices in the rock, and landed to light a bare fire. And when the heat of the flames reached Zaratan's spine. The beast began to slip under the waters with them on top of him, and with all the plants growing on him, until only those able to swim away were saved. This outdoes even the boldest, most imaginative piece of fiction. Let us now consider a 13th century text by Al-Qaswini, the Persian cosmographer who wrote in Arabic. It comes from a work of his entitled Wonders of Creation and runs this way. As for the sea turtle, it is of such huge size that people on shipboard take it for an island. One merchant has reported, rising out of the sea, we discovered an island with green plants, and we went ashore and dug pits for a cooking fire, and the island began to move. And the sailor said, back to the ship, it's a turtle. The heat of the fires has wakened him and will be lost. This story is repeated in the navigation of St. Brendan. And then they sailed forth and came soon after to that land. But because of the little depth in some place, and in some place were great rocks. But as the last they went upon on ye land, when to them they had been safe and made thereon a fire for to dress their dinner. But St. Brandon abode still in the ship, and when the fire was right hot, and the meat nigh sodden, then this island began to move, whereof the monks were afraid, and fled anon to the ship, and left the fire and meat behind them, and marveled sore of the moving. And Saint Brandon comforted them and said that it was a great fish named Jasconi, which laboureth night and day to put his tail in his mouth, but for greatness he may not. In the Anglo-Saxon bestiary of the Executor book, or Exeter book, the dangerous island is a whale skilled in treachery that deliberately tricks seafarers. They camp on its back, seeking rest from their labors at sea. Suddenly the ocean's guest sinks down and the men drown. In the Greek bestiary, the whale stands for the whore of the Proverbs. Her feet go down to death. Her steps take hold on hell. In the Anglo-Saxon bestiary, it stands for the devil and evil. These same symbolic values will be found in Moby Dick, written 10 centuries later. Oh, wow. Wild stuff, right? Thinking about these magical islands. You know, immediately two stories from the magical Greek world come to my mind. I think, of course, of A True Story by Lucian, right? One of the parts of the story in A True Story is after the heroes in our story crash back down to Earth from outer space, they get swallowed by a magical whale. And then inside the whale, they find an entire world, right? This animal's so big, there exists an entire like ecosystem inside with a whole culture and community thriving, right? Just kind of wild stuff. And I also think about of course, Delos, the magic island of Delos. Because what's the story with the magic island of Delos, right? We have the goddess Astaria, right? And Astaria is chased by Zeus. And in order to flee from him, she turns herself into an island and she hides in the waters, and she's said to be a moving island, right? And then later on, when we have her sister is pregnant by Zeus with the twins, right? Artemis and Apollo, right? And she's being chased by Hera. What happens is she lands on her sister, who's now the island Delos, and gives birth to them on the magic island. You know, so there's all this kind of interesting stuff about these mobile magic islands. It's a fun thing to think about, you know, right? How all these stories kind of are similar and distinct. But that's it, I believe. Yeah, that's the end. We have read everything from this incredible book, Imaginary Beings by Jorge Luis Borges. That was fun. So we'll have to find another interesting book like this to dig into for tomorrow. Oh, how interesting. All right. That's great. That one that sinks and rises back up from the sea. Yeah, there's several like that. I'm trying to think of a specific one, but I'm drawing a blank. If anyone can think of islands like Veldane is talking about, please mention them in the chat. But yeah, it's such a fun mythopoetic idea, right? Mobile islands that may be turtles or whales. Wild, right? Excuse me. Okay. Oh, thank you, Louis Borges. What a fun read. What an incredible book. I'm glad we dived into that. We got to explore so many different cultures and myths and ideas, right? And we got an interesting spin on them from a literary perspective. So that was a really fun book. I highly recommend everyone go check it out. Book of Imaginary Beings. We're now going to dive into our short story proper today. And this is a really wild one. It's a little bit of a longer one, but I'm excited to read it from you. It's called The Eternal Smile, and it's by a writer. I'd read another story by the same writer last time before I went on my vacation. It's by Par Lagerkvist, and this guy is one of the greatest writers of all time. He won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1951, and really interesting character. But this story, I can't say too much. Just you're gonna have to strap in because it's a bit of a longer one. But we're gonna get into some wildness, to put it mildly. So strap in, hold on for dear life. I always try to bring you guys the real hard hitting, powerful short stories, and this one really moved me. Okay. The Eternal Smile. There were once upon a time a few of the dead sitting together somewhere in the darkness. They didn't know where, perhaps nowhere. They were sitting and talking to pass eternity away. No, said one of them, continuing a conversation that had been going on for ages on end. The living are too self complacent. They busy themselves with their odds and ends and imagine they're alive. When they come out of their houses in the morning and hurry off in the sharp air, pleased with the new day, they shoot secret glances at each other as much as to say, you and I, we live. And they hurry off to their works, good and bad, heap them on top of each other, one above the other, till the whole thing topples over and they can begin again. They're conceited, contented little insects, nothing more. They build up and pull down, build up and pull down, and sweat with zeal and wink secretively at one another. We live, we live, we live. They build and they point to everything they've got half finished or near enough. We've got all this done, every bit of it. They're conceited little insects, nothing more. He sat staring in front of him, fretting. He was lean, embittered, tormented. Up to the present, life has a few millions dead. Millions dead, he went on. It is we who live. We exist in those below. We exist quietly. We go about in stockinged feet. No one hears us. It is not we who make the fuss. We are unobtrusive and silent. It is not we who mind steam engines, who start trains, who call up on the phone, but it is we who live. It is not we who build up and pull down, build up and pull down. It is not we who feel that this is morning, that this is evening, but it is we who live. And he sighed heavily. It is we who think of everything, who arrange everything. It is we who cannot forget anything. It is we who long for everything, day after day, year after year, for thousands and thousands of years. Whenever there is a little quiet, it is us. When anyone weeps, it is us. Whenever anything really happens, it is us. The living is simply what is dead. He stopped short and spat in front of him, wiping his mouth. He mumbled something to himself, which no one could hear. I wonder whether you are right, after all, rejoined another, mildly and reflectively. God knows whether we are so important. I wonder whether if one looks deeper, the living too haven't some significance. They make use of us, they exploit us unscrupulously, and with it all they brag so much about themselves. But they do really contribute something of their own, and such it is, it has great value at the moment. even though later on it has hardly any. I can't agree that they haven't a certain importance of their own. I even venture so far as to maintain that it is they who live and we who are dead. They sat silent a long while, each turning it over in his own mind. At last, the lean one began again, resting his head in his dry hand and staring out into what looked like darkness. It is long since I was alive, but I remember that I lived by the sea. I believe that I was born there and stayed there all the time, but possibly I only came there once by chance and left again. I no longer remember, and anyhow, it makes no difference. In any case, I remember that I lived by the sea. I remember the small rattling pebbles at the water's edge, but the gale above all, drowning the other noises, the roaring gale with all the great clouds over the water. And I remember the quietness, the unmoving quietness, the complete silence around me. The sea, that is the only great thing down there. Down there, it is eternity. I lived by the sea. I had a house close to the shore with a view over the unfathomable depths. In one of the windows stood a little dried pot plant, which I always forgot to water. I don't know why I remember it. It played no part in my life. I lived by the sea. Yet I remember it very well. I remember that it was still there when I was going to die. And now I thought to myself, if it were not that I was going to die, I ought to get up and give it a little water. I recalled, too, that as I lay and looked at it, I thought it strange that it should outlive me. Poor thing. However, it played no part in my life. I lived by the sea. I was a man of great importance. As far as I know, there was no one in my time like me and no one so important. At least I never noticed it. I didn't meet other people very much either. I lived alone by myself. I listened to the gale and to the quietness. I was already in my lifetime a living, struggling man. I felt within myself everything that really is. I was greater and more than anybody else. In point of fact, so far as I know, there was no one besides myself. I was simple, made to die. I was simply made to die. That is not true of everyone, of course, but I had the proper dignity and weight. Living really consisted in me. I could die secure. I needed only to die. He left off. A deep sigh forced itself from his lips. Then he went on, seriously as before. I think that in order to be dead, that is, in order to belong to eternity, one needs to be something really important. One needs to have been outside and above life in the ordinary sense, not to have been included in it. And I was, as I have already said, a very important man. The second now joined in. Without going into what has just been said, I should like to mention that I too was a very important person, though it is with the greatest reluctance that I say it of myself. I was, if not in my own, yet in everyone else's eyes, the most remarkable person who had existed on the earth up to that time. I lived a rich, glorious life. I carried out feat after feat, one great work after another, which mankind will never be able to forget. I myself, however, have forgotten what it was all about. And even if I could recall all that, it would only weary me here. I don't feel in the least remarkable now. I feel very ordinary, strangely insignificant. I was simply made to live. To my mind, anyone is fit for sitting here and being dead, but for living, really living, and taking pleasure in it. Only the great, the prodigious man is fit for that. I was such a man. In my own and many others' view, it was not intended that I should ever die. And in fact, it came about through a trivial accident. He sighed, he too, and sat mute for a long time, sunk in his thoughts. Then he added, as I have already mentioned, I was a very exceptional man. However, I am not remarkable now. I think life is something incomprehensibly great and rich. I think death is nothing. Despising my own emptiness, I love everything living. Nevertheless, I would maintain that very few people have really lived. Although I am reluctant to speak about myself, I should like to mention that, so far as I know, I alone have lived. However, I am dead now. He left off. It seemed as if the conversation were at an end, but it was continued by a third person. He was a fat, thick-set man with little eyes, and his hands clasped across his expansive paunch. He looked like a grocer, trustworthy but a little undistinguished, perhaps. His short legs hung dangling in what looked like darkness. You could see that if he had been sitting on a chair, his feet would not have reached the floor. He said, "Although I haven't understood anything of what you gentlemen have been saying, I feel all the same how completely I agree with you about everything. How good it was to be alive, how great life was, and how lovely. When I stood behind my counter with all my goods around me, with the smell of cheese and coffee, of soft soap and margarine, how good was life. My shop was the biggest in the town. As far as I know, there was no other so important as mine. It was in the best street. Everybody came to me. I had choicer goods than any other. Yes, so far as I know, there was no other. I am not saying it is to appear important. I was quite an ordinary person after all. I was Mr. Peterson, the grocer, nothing more. I was like everybody else. I was Mr. Peterson, the grocer. But I thank God that I lived. It was hard when I had to die. I turned to the wall and I said to myself, "This is the end, Peterson." I couldn't believe that it wasn't the end of everything. There had been no time for me to think about higher matters. I had had enough to do with my own. I was no remarkable person either. I was Mr. Peterson, the grocer. I was like everybody else. And when I lay and thought back over my life, when I thought how year in and year out I had stood and weighed out groceries and wrapped up salt herring, then I thought it was too strange if on that account I should exist through all eternity. I said to myself, damned if I know whether there's any life after death. I don't think there is. Then I die. And yet there was after all. Here I sit after all. And it's oops. And it's as though nothing had happened. It's as though I still stood and weighed out groceries and wrapped up herring. I am still Mr. Peterson, the grocer. He left off move. Then he added, "Although I don't understand anything, I am thankful for everything. I have lived. I am dead. All the same, I live. I am thankful for it all." He stopped and sank there, sunk in deep thought. It grew quiet. The conversation passed on upward in the darkness to other groups of people. Farther and farther removed, it went on in a loop which rose higher and higher. Then it twisted downward again. After nearly 100 years, it once more reached the group where it had started. It came in now from the opposite side, but this time it didn't give rise to so many words. The embittered one said, "As I mentioned before, I was a very important man. I believe, too, that in order to be dead, that is, in order to belong to eternity, it is necessary to be something really important. It is necessary to have been outside and above life in the ordinary sense, not to have been included in it. I was such a man." The second one spoke next. "I think that life is everything. I think that life is something incomprehensibly great and rich, which can only be grasped by the great man, the prodigious man. I was such a man. However, I am dead now." Then the grocer, who sat a little out of the way and apart from them, added, "I am still Mr. Peterson, the grocer." But while they just sat thinking about this, other conversations were going on among the people round about them. Everyone was describing his life, absorbed in it. One said, "I'm thinking about myself and my life. My workshop, where I worked from morning till night, lay on the outskirts of a big town. I was a locksmith. I did nothing else. What am I going to tell you is about that, the little smithy, where I was always by myself. For I wouldn't have any help or anyone about, lay hidden away in an orchard where there were many trees and a lot of fruit and flowers, which someone whom I didn't know had planted some long time ago. But everything was unkempt and ran wild. I had my own job. I did nothing else. I stood in the half dark smithy from morning till late into the night and made my locks for all the houses that people lived in away in the town. I didn't make them in the ordinary way. I made every one different. I made them so that each one was different from every other that there was, and could only be opened by somebody who had the one key and knew the way to turn it in the lock. For I made them so that the key had first to be turned in one direction, then pushed farther in and turned in the other. Or I would devise other secret methods. I thought out hidden subtleties which only one person could master. I hated people. I shut them in each by himself. My locks became famous. They were sold in a shop, but I don't know where it was. I didn't know the town. I never left my house. I worked at my own job. Everyone wanted my locks for their houses, so that no one should be able to break in. I worked day and night. I stood bent over my work year in and year out alone. I worked at my own job. I made locks. The money piled up. They were expensive locks. People bought them all the same. I was rich. I didn't know what I owned. I was poor. I grew old and gray. My fingers began to shake at their work. I was alone. No one saw it. I went back over the things in my mind. I went on working with my shaking hands. I am telling you about my life. Then it happened. One morning I raised my head and thought and looked out of the dusky workshop window that through a gap in the orchard. I saw a young girl go past on the road. She was 17, perhaps 18. She was walking bareheaded. She had fair hair that shone in the sun. She was happy and looked about her as she walked. It was only for a minute that I had a sight of her. Then she was gone, hidden by the trees. I stood gripped by something. I dropped my work and stared out, but she was no longer there. The picture remained. Her fair hair, her happy face, which was so young and firm. I thought I knew her. I had never seen her before. I never saw people. I felt as if she had been my child. I don't know why. I had never lived with any woman. I, miserable old man, bent and shaking. I felt as if she were my child. Her hair was so fair that the sun, when it came and caressed, it seemed to linger there. I didn't know who she was. I only knew I loved her. I stood staring out, but she was no longer there. Slowly, I turned back again to my work. My hands shook more than before. No one saw it, only I. I found it hard to hold the parts. I tightened my hold of them. I turned back again. I drew my rough hand across my mouth. I got ready to go on with my own job. I said to myself, there is nothing to love. Nothing is worth our love. Nothing. I turned back again, blotted it out. I worked at my own job, but my eyes had grown so dim. I went and wiped the dust from the window so that I could see to work. I waited for her to go the same way back again. The whole day went by. I worked hard. I got more done that day than usual. Not before evening, when the light began to fail, did she come back. I saw her again. She went along, smiling. What was left of the sun shone in her hair alone. I stood mute at the window and gazed. When she had vanished, I crept out. I went through the orchard. It was summer. There was a smell of flowers, but everything had grown wild. I came out onto the road. It was all strange. I crept after her. I came into the town. I followed her at a distance. The streets opened one after the other. I saw nothing but her. She went into a house. I stood outside, but a long way off, the children began to laugh at me. I had my apron on. Slowly, I went back to my own place. Now I thought no more about her. I went on working as before. In a little while, I grew very old. Summer came to an end and autumn set in. The leaves began to fall in the orchard. Then one night it happened that while I stood as usual, bent over my work, my heart went empty and cold. I was so cold that I shivered. My whole body was like ice. I dropped what I was working on. I was shaking. My legs wouldn't carry me. I felt as if I couldn't live much longer. Such an anguish came upon me that I looked around me wildly in the half dark room where only a lantern spread its flickering light. It was windy and raining outside. The overgrown trees beat against the panes with their bare branches. I didn't want to die, not alone, not here where everything was my own. I staggered out into the passage. I pushed open the door, went out. The wind tried to knock me down. The rain beat against my face. I gathered all the strength I had left. I staggered out onto the road into the town. There was no one in the bleak, windswept streets, only me. I groped my way in the rain and darkness. I went groping my way to her house. I wanted to die near her, near my child. I couldn't find it. I went wrong. At last I got there. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I knocked, no one answered. I groped over the lock with my old fingers. I wanted to die near my child, near her whom I loved. No one came. I rushed back home. I set the bellows going, melted and molded. I filed out keys, as many as I remembered. It was many thousand. The night went on. I filed and filed. I had worked all my life. It was many thousand. I hung them on a string. I staggered out, sinking under the burden. Now I remembered that she could not love me. I am an old man who had to die, who only had to die. I went back and got what I had saved up. It was more than I thought. I gave her that, all I possessed. Then perhaps she would let me die near her. Sinking under the burden, I staggered out. The wind caught hold of me. I rushed on, exhausted. I arrived at her house. I groped for the lock. I tried the keys, one after the other. Not one fitted. Not one. It must have been a tiny part of the bit that wouldn't fit in. I knew it needed so little. I knew it. My heart stood still. I was shaking with the rain and the wind. I wanted to sink down. My life was ended. I wanted to sink down. Dazed, I staggered out into the street again, drifted about. It was empty and desolate. There was only me. I tried the keys in all the houses. I no longer asked for so much. I didn't ask to die near my child, near her whom I loved. I only asked for a human being, anyone, only someone that I could be with when I had to die. I tried and tried. I could get in nowhere. I sank down on the steps of a house I didn't know, and my heart struggled no more. They found me there in the morning with all my keys in my arms. The gold was gone. I hadn't been able to give it to anybody. They had only taken it from me, but the keys were still there. Nobody wanted those. He left off and sat mute. Another said, on the slope of a hill lies a very ancient village. It lies in the sun. The streets climb upward, upward. Their walls are whitewashed. The houses shine, just shine. I and my brothers lived there. They were happy and good. I was wicked, bad. There hadn't been enough to go around. They worked out in the fields. In the evenings, they came home. I had a cramped forehead. I was without peace. I lay quiet in a corner and didn't speak. They sat and ate. I had such a grudge against them. I don't know why. Afterwards, they went out into the street and talked and sang. One played the zither. It sounded so lovely. I lay and wept. It was not a human being, it was a zither. Its singing was so wonderfully lovely. They didn't say anything to me. They detested me. Why? I pined away. For me, there was nothing. I got something on the quiet and put it in their food so that they died. It was all I could do. It was all I had in life. It made no difference. All the houses still lay in the sun as before. Everybody smiled and was happy. I pined away. I'm only saying this to ask why. At that, another said, I hoarded joy. I stole it from others in order to have it myself. I wanted to be the happiest person there was. I never had enough. Things went well for me. I hoarded and hoarded. I was greedy for joy. I never got enough. I grabbed so much for myself that there was nothing left all around me. And it was a big country. When I grew old, I began to doubt whether I had been right in what I had done, whether with all that I possessed I could really call myself happy. I reproached myself about much of my life. I felt doubts about myself. But one day I met someone I had robbed. He tottered along. He was ill and wretched to look at. Then I realized that I was right. I was not like him. Then I realized my happiness, which I had stolen for myself. I was rich. He had nothing. A few days later, he died. It was said that the last words he uttered were that he was better dead. I died too, not long after, in the part where we lived. I had enormous stretches of country where I went shooting in the autumn. One morning I went out to shoot alone, although I was nearing 80. It was raining. The woods smelled as they do in autumn. I happened to trip and the gun went off. The last I remember is that I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. It was wet. I remember that smell of rain. That was the last. I remember it still, and I am filled with all the happiness that comes from having lived. So they went on with their stories. Many of them never said anything. You wouldn't have known they were there. Among these was an old man, small and insignificant. He just sat there and listened to the others. He had a warm heart and took a lively interest in what each one of them said. But when he thought about his own life, it seemed to him so humble and almost ridiculous that he was ashamed to think back over it. He listened when the others talked of their own affairs, and he lived himself through their lives. It was as though he had none himself, not but that he too had something of his own, something that was his and no one else's. He persuaded himself most of the time that what he called his own was simply that by which he lived the others' lives, that which enabled him to understand everything. Himself, he was nothing, but at times it broke through as something else. He could feel it so beautifully and strange deep down, but he wasn't able to give it to others. He wanted to give, he wanted to open it out. He too wanted to sit and talk of his own modest life, just as the others talked of theirs, of what it was like, what he thought of and what he felt while he lived. But just as he was going to bring it out, he was frightened at seeing how insignificant his existence must seem to everyone else. It must all seem so pitiable to them. They would have to laugh at him, make fun of him. And he didn't want that because for him, life was not pitiable or laughable, not even his own. So he only listened to the others. He had nothing to say himself. In the other's existence, life had been so much greater than his. He saw that he ought not to push to the front with what he had, which was so much less. And thus everything seemed more beautiful, as great and beautiful as it really was. They had all experienced something great or rich. In them, something had flowered and borne fruit. Perhaps they didn't always feel it themselves as anything so great, but he felt it, knew that it was so. So he listened to everyone and was happy in them. Those who spoke ill of life, he didn't believe those. But even in them, there was such passion, such depth in their pain, he understood what their meaning had been and listened, as though to a vast river far away from him. For he had not experienced anything great himself, not felt anything rich and powerful within him. He had only lived with quiet gladness. In a lavatory underground, he had sat in a box and taken the money. For a penny, he had given out a little paper. That was all. That was why he didn't want to talk about his life. It must seem to the others so meaningless, perhaps ridiculous. His whole existence had gone by down there. He had taken the job as a young man, not intending to stay, only so as to have something to do while he waited for his real calling. As time went on, he had begun to see that this too was a calling, and that it was his. Why should he not be content? He filled a place that had to be filled. If he didn't do it, then someone else must. That being so, he could do it just as well. It was an insignificant place, but he was of no significance either. He was an ordinary man, and this was a place for an ordinary man. So he thought, and he stayed, and he was happy. Although he sat down there from morning till night and seldom saw daylight, yet he came to understand life and love it above everything. He understood that there was nothing ugly in it. Everything was beautiful and good. Some parts were greater, some were less, but everything had its significance. Nothing was indifferent or without value. Nothing ought to be denied. Not everything could reach greatness. Some of it had to be strangely small, simply that the rest might be the more remarkable, might rise the higher, for life was rich, but not so rich as all that. So he sat thinking down there, and as the years went by, there was much he understood. He learned to know humanity only as it came down there to him. and yet he learned both to know it and to understand it. They made their way down there to him not to carry out any great deeds, not to live, not to be human in the highest sense. They came to carry out a common act which was shared by all that lived. But there was nothing low, nothing degrading to them in the act. They were something great and noble, and he loved them. He particularly loved one kind of men, those who were strong, collected, those whom you felt life had taken hold of in order to use, in order to compel to its own end. There was such a calm about them. And even down there, even down here, such a simple dignity that they filled him with assurance and confidence. He could sit and hear their sounds from out of the closets. Yet when they came out, all memory of the act inside was blotted out for them. They were nothing but passion, nothing but a struggle to reach the one, the greatest. He was able to sit for a long while afterward and feel glad about them, remember their faces, think how they were now going about up there in the sun and doing life's great deeds with a clear confidence. Such was his thoughts about humanity. That was how he saw it. But humanity paid no attention to him, hardly noticed him. He handed them their paper after he meant no more to them. There were a few whom he recognized from a long time back. They came year after year. They grew bent and gray. They aged with him, but they didn't know him. Even now in eternity, he still sat and listened for humanity and believed in it. They didn't know he was there. He might just as well not have been, but he was among them and he was happy. Now, so often when he was alive, he sometimes longed to be able to give himself, to be able to open his heart, to make somebody a gift of what he had collected. But when he felt that what he possessed was not his, that with him more than with others it belonged solely to life itself, then he contented himself with listening, with gathering in, and gathering in as if he knew that it would nevertheless some time be passed on to another, to one greater than himself. There were many less happy than he. Many were afflicted by their loneliness, by being different from everybody else, because no one was like them, and so no one could feel the things they most deeply felt. There were two like this. They sat a little ways off by themselves. They could not understand the others, nor be understood by them. They could not understand each other either, but they could talk together, each about himself. The one was without a thumb on his right hand. He had never had one. It had made him lonely all his life. He had felt that he was something set apart, that he was different from everybody else. He felt it even now. He had not considered himself as an outcast, stricken by an unhappy fate. He had lived among men, met many, come close to many, and yet he had always felt that there was a certain something that divided him from them, an invisible wall which could no one could penetrate or break down. They might talk to him as to others. They might think they had reached his innermost being, but they could not conceive who he was, for he was other than they. Now, as he sat in eternity, he was able to see how right he had been in his feeling that he was something quite set apart, and to understand how deep his individuality lay in his nature. Even now, he was without a thumb on his right hand. Now he felt still more how perfectly alone he was. He could sit and listen to what the others said, but it would somehow glide past him. It was as if they spoke another language. He didn't understand them, and they didn't understand him, for they were not like him, without a thumb on their right hand. So he altogether abandoned himself to grief over his loneliness, dug himself into it deeper and deeper, lived solely for it. The other had all his fingers intact, but he had a black spot on the nail of one middle finger. He had it even as a child, but it had never been wiped out. He went through the whole of his life with that spot on his nail. He grew old. He died with it. The strange thing was that many did not even suspect his loneliness. They noticed nothing and they thought he was like them. He was forced to smile gently when he thought about it. He was different from the whole world, and the world had no suspicion of the difference. But he himself carried the spot like a burden that weighed him down to the earth. He sought mankind one after another, but no one was like him. He believed that the spot which made him a stranger in life would at last be wiped out by life itself, which gave it to him. but it was not wiped out. His loneliness grew and grew. It felt like an empty waste around him wherever he went. He didn't complain. Nobody knew of his suffering. Nobody knew that he sought and sought one in the whole world who was like him. He passed out of life without anybody suspecting his struggle. Now that he sat here in the darkness, he couldn't see the black spot on his nail, but he knew that it was there. He felt more deeply than ever the strangeness of his fate. There was an emptiness around him as boundless as the impenetrable darkness. It was a quiet satisfaction to them both that they had found each other. They could sit talking together. After all, there was a little warmth in that. But they couldn't understand each other. They understood that they were both alone, but they didn't understand each other's loneliness. Each knew his own suffering, but he couldn't grasp the other's, only dimly sense it like a dwindling flame far off in the night. The one had a black spot on one nail, but he was not without a thumb on his right hand. The other was without a thumb on his right hand, but he had no spot on his nail. So their eternities passed. Not far from them sat a man and a woman talking in whispers to each other. They spoke so low that no one could hear what they said. You heard only the passion underneath the words. They had loved each other a whole lifetime. They sought each other still. The man said, "When I love you, it is as if I were living as a stranger, far away in a great land where I was not born. I see the trees and the mountains. I see the clouds and the hovering birds, a great strange land. I hear the wind rustling in the light woods. I hear the rivers roaring deep down in the valleys. And I stand listening and listening. It is not my land where I was born. When I love it, for I long for my own land far away where I was born." The woman said, "When I am with you, I am happy." But the man said, "You have never understood me. You have never reached me, nor I you." The woman said, "I have loved you." The man said, "You have never understood why I lived. I have struggled and suffered, built up and pulled down. I have sought and sought. I have doubted and doubted in you." The woman said, "I have believed." He sat thinking about himself, saw everything, brought everything together. He said, "I have struggled in the cause of life." The woman said, "I have lived." They were quiet, each alone with what was theirs. The man said, "How we are both dead, and I still long for you." The woman said, "I am still with you, beloved." But a simple working man who sat ignored among all the others began to speak. He said timidly, and as if looking in on himself, "I long for home. I had a little home in one of the poor suburbs, but we were not poor. We had 2 rooms and a kitchen, one with sun in the morning. Everywhere it was clean and cared for, with white cloths on the tables, in the windows, and on the table in the front room a big yellow cloth that my wife had crocheted. We were happy and wanted for nothing. When I came home in the evening from the factory where the work was heavy and laborious, I was black and sooty, and I couldn't touch anything. I washed and changed my clothes. Until then, I couldn't hold the youngster, but he wanted to come to his father as soon as I came in at the door. I had to keep him off. At first, before I had a home, I used to go to bed dirty as I was. I didn't care. Nothing meant anything to me. It didn't matter. Nothing, now everything mattered. When I looked around me, every little thing meant that I was happy. We had supper together. Then we sat for a while. We didn't light the lamp. The boy came and climbed up onto my knee. He pretended that I was a horse and he was riding far away in a great forest where it was all dark. But the horse found the way home again. He went to sleep on my arm. The cheek that had been lying against me was red. That's why I long for home. Afterward, we sat and talked about him. It was as if we were talking about ourselves. My wife had a lilting voice, which I can never forget. It began to get dark. I remember the pattern on the plates and a picture on the wall. I remembered the chest of drawers and the old brown sofa and the youngster's engine on the floor. That's why I long for home. So he spoke quietly, dreaming back to what had been his his. But in another part, a man was talking about his life to some of them who found it interesting to listen to him. He was young. He seemed not to have needed very long for a living. He described everything in great deal from beginning to end. It seemed trustworthy and well thought out beforehand. Slowly, he told his story. I arrived one evening at an old mill in the woods. It is not yet very late in the evening. It seems as if everything is fresh and beginning anew. The sun's light falls obliquely into the wood. The birds are still singing. It is like morning. The dew is on the grass. It wets my horse's hoofs. It is spring. There is a smell of earth and big trees. The road I am following seems to go through the miller's yard. So I ride in under the gateway, not intending to stay but to go on farther. But inside it is so charming and strange that I have to draw rein and look about me for a while. On all four sides runs low white buildings, which look as if they have been whitened by the flour that is sifted out from the mill and from the sacks when they were loaded onto the wagons. Even the ground is dusted with flour. My horse shies at it and paws up the black earth with one hoof. But to me it seems altogether an idyllic scene. It is so peaceful with its sheltering walls, and yet there is some massiveness and richness about it that makes it impressive. In the yard stands an old cart, from whose front wheels the rims are gone, and the spokes almost rotted away, until it looks as if it has gone down on its knees. It stands outside the mill itself, which is a massive building, broad and prosperous, and with the big black hatch in the middle. As I sit there in the saddle, this hatch, which is a little way above the ground, is opened, and out of the darkness, inside comes the miller, and behind him his wife. I feel sure that it must be the miller and his wife. He is a powerful, swarthy man with dusty clothes, but his hands, like an engineer's, oily, greasy, as if he tended an engine. He looks serious and dependable, but his wife, who would be about 40 or 50, is fat and jolly, and looks like a great gorged beast, which is waiting until it can manage to eat some more. Her breasts lie like flat loaves down the front of her body, which she turns full toward me, and two well-fed arms rest between them and her stomach. She looks at me with round, good-natured eyes that haven't any brows, and greets me with a jerk of the fat neck. I reply in the elated tone of one who is on horseback and has ridden all day in the woods. The charming atmosphere of the place, too, has put me into high spirits. I tell them what a pleasant surprise it is to find such a secluded little corner here, so far in the woods. Let them see how taken with it I am. The miller doesn't reply. He stands looking up into the air, but the woman gives me a soft and gratiating smile. Yes, it is lovely here. I enlarge further on the excellences of the place. How spick and span everything is, how clean the curtains up at the windows are, how neat the yard is with its white flour, and how pleasing it looks with the old cart stuck there, the stumps of its legs in the ground. The miller's wife takes it all in. She stands straddled in the middle of the opening and beams. The miller stands with his legs together. At last, she asks me if I won't come in and look around the mill. Yes, I should very much like to. So I jump down from my horse and look about for a ring in the wall where I can tie him up. But there are no rings. I shall have to make him fast to the old abandoned cart. That will be all right. Then I clamber up to the miller and his wife. It's a bit strenuous, for the opening is placed rather high up, and there are no steps. My feet slip on the flowery wall. When I finally get up to them, I am panting from the effort. The miller's wife brushes me down with an amiability which seems almost familiar, and smiles so that two great tusks are visible at the very back of the otherwise toothless mouth. The miller is serious as the grave. We go on into the mill. The droning begins, but mellow, thick, and mealy. The millstones don't make much noise, large and heavy though they are. They go around placidly. They put you in a lazy good humor. You feel there is a lot of flour between them. It is a rather agreeable feeling. The flour lies inch deep on the floor. It shows deep footprints. The miller stands and gapes. I think how stupid he looks. But the woman beams. She's a friendly soul, anyhow. She fusses around me, talking the whole time, and she seems now even fatter than before. I notice that there on her broad bottom is a narrow groove, just as if she had nothing on underneath. But I find nothing laughable in this. It seems almost repulsive to me, and yet I can't get it out of my mind. I follow her bobbing backside all the time, wondering how anybody can bear to go on like that. But now the miller opens a little door at the very back of the dim building, and a tremendous roar bursts in through the opening, and at the same time a violent draught makes the flour swirl around the woman and myself. I realize that it is the mill wheel and great masses of water falling, and I follow curiously after him. But the woman gets irritable and wants to know what he can be doing out there. He can't hear her for the roar. I turn my back on her and go out through the little door myself. I step onto a narrow plank, which is wet and slimy. I am on the point of slipping, but I regain my balance and take still another couple steps. Here it is, really wonderful. I stand amazed and draw a deep breath. The enormous mill wheel with its slimy old paddle roars, a vast and awful music, drawing it up out of the gloomy water down below. The roar is so powerful that I am half stunned and have to hold on to a projecting bulk that makes my hands wet and cold. It feels uncanny to stand like this, with the river sweeping past below you, black and menacing. And yet it is so vast, so immense that it grips you. I breathe deeply with joy, drawing the fresh coolness of the evening, looking down at the river, which hurls itself on between steep and narrow banks. I remember now that I have heard the river in the distance during my journey through the woods and wondered why I never quite caught sight of it. I am glad now at having actually seen it. It drives violently against the banks, rushing and roaring, but it doesn't foam. It stays gloomily dark all the time. Finally, I look around at the miller. He is lying crouched at the very end, greasing the mill wheel. It looks strange. His outstretched head with the black forelock over his forehead and the drooping mustache looks perfectly ludicrous in its infinite woefulness. The big fellow is talking to himself all the time. I can hear nothing, just see his mouth going. Things like that seem ridiculous out here where everything else is so imposing. I turn around again and stare down into the stream rushing past below me. Dusk is growing deeper and deeper. In the end, the water gets pitch black. At length, I walk back along the slippery plank into the house. I wonder what has become of the woman. She is still bustling about around the millstone inside, as fat and buxom as ever. When she catches sight of me, she stops and smiles good naturedly, but I can see that she is put out. She wants to know what we can have been doing out there so long. I reply that it was so magnificent that one could hardly bring oneself to come away, and I ask her why she wouldn't go out too. She says that it is so slippery on the planks, and besides, she can't get through the narrow door. Then I look at her and burst out laughing. I can't help it. But she isn't uncomfortable. She strokes herself slowly over her fat thighs and gives me a glance whose meaning I don't quite understand. Then she wonders why her husband doesn't come, what he can be up to out there. He is greasing the wheel, I say, offhand, as if that were perfectly natural. At that, she goes to the door with an impatient jerk of her head. She sticks her head out into the darkness and calls to him, but he seems not to hear. She calls again. Nobody comes. I go up to her to see what I can do. Over her head, I can see him sitting there as before, doing the greasing. He seems so idiotic, crouched there, that I have to laugh. We both of us call out, but he neither hears nor sees. The mill wheel roars in the darkness. It is almost horrible. He greases and greases. We call out again and again, both at the same time. He doesn't stir. At that, she slams the door so that the whole house resounds with it and fastens the latch on the inside. But immediately afterward, she is again amiability itself, just as if nothing happened. But between her and myself, nothing has happened. It is only her husband she is put out with, of course. We begin to talk about one thing and another, odds and ends. what fine weather it is, and how hard it may be to flay an elephant alive. The kind of thing you talk about when you don't know what to say. She shows a lively interest the whole time. In the end, I say that I must be setting off, that I must be getting on farther and not lose any more time. She looks at me surprised and asks what I can be thinking of, what I mean going on farther. Farther, I say, I mean I shall carry on a bit before it gets pitch dark. Carry on, she says, but the road ends here. What, I exclaim. Astonished, the road ends here. She nods her head. She puts her arms on her stomach and a good natured smile spreads over her whole face. Yes, this is the end, she repeats again. It is a bit of a shock to me, and here was I supposing it to be an ordinary road going on farther. No, sir, she says, and smiles so that the two tusks are visible at the very back of her mouth. If you had wanted to go on farther, sir, then you should have turned off at the little fork, sir, 100 miles back in the woods. There you should have turned to the left, sir, and then you should have gone to the right, sir, and then to the left, and then to the right, and then to the right again, and then to the left. I exclaim. Good heavens, she adds. That's the right way. But of course, no one finds it. I feel this really is a shock, but she consoles me good naturedly. It is lovely here, isn't it? So it doesn't matter. You can very well stay the night here, sir, and then try to begin again early tomorrow morning. I'm sure we shall make you comfortable, sir, as well as we can manage. And we've got an attic where you can sleep like a log right on into the day. I can't help feeling touched by her kindness, annoyed as I am at having been delayed in this way. I stand turning it over in my mind, then gratefully accept her invitation. It may really be a pleasant little experience to spend the night in such a charming and strange old mill in the middle of the woods. It will always be something to remember later on in life, and it really will be fine to have a bite of supper, perhaps, and then stretch out in a good bed. I am glad things turned out as they have. She leads me through a dark passageway into the dwelling house and opens a door into a big, comfortable room. She lights the candles, thick yellow candles that look to me as if they can never burn out. They spread a warm, cozy light over everything. She leaves me alone for a while, just getting something to eat, she says. There are clean curtains at all the windows, a freshly scrubbed floor, a big, dazzling white cloth on the huge table. Everything is so wholesome and honest. I have to sit down and feel how well I am, how satisfied with everything. I'm hungry too. It will be nice to have something to eat. She comes in with the food. First, a great trough of porridge and a cask of beer, which she trundles in through the door with her foot. It is meal porridge with a thick layer of sugar and cinnamon on top, and a huge lump of butter in the middle, and running down to the edges. We sit down on each side of the table, stuffing away till we choke, and drinking beer. We finish up the whole troughful. I gasp with effort. She wipes her mouth contentedly. Next, she brings in an enormous dish of fried eels floating in oil. They're so fat they quiver on the plate and slide away under your fork. We eat them with our fingers. The oil runs down our necks. They're very good. She eats a vast amount. I eat a good deal too. It seems strange to me that I can eat so much. I don't need much as a rule. It's as if I had never eaten in all my life. I drink beer with it till I'm fit to burst. When we have finally cleaned up the dish, she goes out and gets the next course. It's the roast. It's so large that I can see her as she brings it in. I feel I can manage. I can't manage anymore. But it's so deliciously brown that I have to try a little bit of this too. She gives me a staggering helping. She helps herself to twice as much. We eat. We eat in silence. We don't say a word. I hear her chewing with the tusks at the back of her mouth. That is all. And I see her round eyes that haven't any brows. They are clear and natural. Mine feel misted over, stupefied. I feel more and more bemused with the food and the beer, most of all with the food, which lies so heavy in my stomach that I can't stir. I am completely befuddled, and yet I help myself to more. Seeing her eat, I can't bear not to eat as well. I eat duly, listlessly, force down the food bit by bit. At last, the meat has almost come to an end. She shifts the last piece onto her plate. When she has finished, she gets up with a motherly smile and goes out into the kitchen again. I feel as if my body were a lump of lead. I lean my arms on the table and gaze dully around me. I raise myself and let out wind so that the room gets as hot as a bake oven. I am drunk, but everything seems lovely to me. I feel thoroughly happy. Everything is so simple and natural and so different from what I had thought. I sit and ponder on life and understand a great deal that I've never understood before. It fits itself together for me. It's all so calm and secure and healthy. I feel about everything that it is as it is. I am happy. She comes in with a fresh dish. It is pork, the boiled rump of a pig, fat as butter. It sticks far out over the edge of the dish. I look at it calmly. I find nothing strange in the idea of eating a little more. It no longer puts me off. I understand the meaning of everything. We sit down to it. I don't eat in the same way as before. I eat slowly, painstakingly. I eat in order to get satisfied. The food gives me pleasure, a simple, natural pleasure. I am completely sober. We don't speak a word. I think she looks a good sort, a real little countrywoman, as they ought to be, and she knows how to look after you. We eat. When there isn't quite so much left, I make sure of helping myself to the rest. It's good to be eating. I sop up the fat with a bit of bread. Then for a sweet, she brings in an almond cake. Not so very large, I think. She cuts it into 20 slices. We each help ourselves and eat in silence. I turn over a great many things in my mind. It is very good, this cake, with the sweet almond. It's satisfying, too. When it is finished, I get up from the table, push the chair under, bow to the woman, and thank her. I thank her briefly but very courteously. It was both ample and good, I say, and taking a few unsteady steps around the cozy room and rubbing my hands, satisfied and contented, I add, and now it will be fine to go up and curl up for a bit. Why, yes, she answers at once, that will be fine, and she throws me her motherly glance. So she takes a candle and tells me to follow her. We go through a narrow passage and up a pokey staircase. I follow behind the whole time. On the stairs, I see her backside in the groove, but I just see it apart from that. It doesn't bother me. I don't feel that it matters. We reach my bedroom. It is a cheerful, pleasant room with light walls and three big windows looking out onto the river. I can hear it roaring down below. Against one of the inner walls stands a roomy bed with clean, freshly laundered sheets. The woman puts down the candle on a chair beside the bed. Its light flickers over the floor. I get a great feeling of comfort and well being when I look around me. It will really be fine to have my sleep out thoroughly. Seeing how contented I am, the woman smiles with such a good natured grin that the two tusks again slip out at the very back of her mouth. Between them there is nothing but empty gums, which stand agape like a fox trap. She's admirable, I think. She arranges the bed a little, smooths it down with a tender hand. Then she hugs her arms together under her breasts so that they lie there like lumps of dough in a great trough, and asks me if there's anything else I want. No, thanks, I reply, a little confused. So she goes towards the door. There she turns around and asks me once again, a little more sharply, it seems to me, if I'm sure there's more I need. No thanks, I say again, a little amused. At that, she goes with a kindly good night. Once she is outside the door, I begin to slowly take off my clothes. My body feels rather heavy and gorged. I take my time so as to enjoy thoroughly the prospect of going to bed. The candle flickers over the broad, honest floorboards as I go padding about. Then I creep down in between the sheets. They are lovely and warm. Everything is lovely and warm. When I stretch out my legs, they rub lightly against my knees, just pleasantly rough. It's lovely. I rest my hands on my stomach and gaze up at the ceiling. Everything is whitewashed and neat, walls and ceiling. The tallow candle spreads its warm light over the room, white, clean curtains at the windows. The river drones and roars down below. It's all very pleasant. I lie and ponder over life, how pleasant it is. I drowse off further and further and understand it all. I think of the woman. I can see her ripe and wholesome, so simple and straightforward. People ought to be like that. Then you could really be fond of them. The food lies in my stomach heavy and good. I can't move. It's so lovely and warm all through my body. It gets better and better. There is neither beginning nor end to anything. My head swims a little. I feel slightly tipsy with well-being. It's lovely. I doze off, then sleep, I suppose. Long afterward, many years afterward, so it seems, I feel as if somebody has come into the room. I half open my eyes. It's the woman, apparently. She has nothing on anymore. Her fat thighs flop against each other as she comes up to the bed, but she is serious, not quite the same as before. You should remember to put out the light, she says rather firmly, and she spits on it and sputters. Yes, I say, of course. Then she creeps into bed. It seems just right to me. I am happy. I put my arms around her neck. With that, she begins to open out to me. We talk about life. We feel the same about everything. She talks a lot about food. I do too. I tell her how much I admired her full figure from the very first. She lays the loaves against me. Then many years pass. I feel very drowsy and happy. I wonder for a moment how my horse can be getting on. He has eaten himself to death, she says. That was a long while ago. Oh, really? I say. I think about life a great deal. I think how great and lovely it is. I think her a great deal. There is neither beginning nor end. In the miller, I wonder. He is greasing the wheel, she says. Oh, yes, I say. Then many years pass. At last I wake. There is something droning a long way off. I sit up in the darkness, rub my eyes. I see nothing. But I hear something roaring and roaring, heavy and monotonous. It is the river. I lie down. It is the river. The woman snores. I hear everything. I am clear headed and sober. She lies with her back against me. It is warm. The river roars and roars, stronger and stronger, more and more violent, undiminishing. It is all so tremendous. It makes me dizzy. I can't bear it. It is too vast. I start up. I rush to the window. I throw it open. The roar bursts in upon me, furious, shattering. It seizes hold of me. I fling myself down. The water grips me. It is icy cold. It hurls me with it. In its rush, it roars, roars. It hurls me against the mill wheel, against the great iron covered paddles. They lacerate me. The blood foams, froths. But in the starlight, I see the miller waving his arms above his head and shrieking madly with triumph and exultation in the darkness, his mouth wide open. It is boundless, overpowering. I gave up my soul in ecstasy. There is nothing. Now that I am dead, I don't know what it's about. I don't know what it meant or what it means. I only describe it as it seemed to me, nothing more. He stopped. Those who had been listening thought it a rather strange story. They made their comments for it or against it. Then they too left off, returned to themselves. But far away from them, in another part, motionless and shut off, shut in on himself, sat a young man, dead long ago. His face was delicate and still kept its youth. He talked to himself every evening, he said. She wanders down there among the flowers. She walks in the woods under the great trees and thinks about me. She sits outside her father's house and remembers me. It's evening now, and she steals away on the noiseless path through the jungle, and it grows dusk. She sits down by the river on the low bank with the scent of the lotus flower. There she waits for me while it grows dark. She waits for the white gleam of my boat, with the water singing softly around it. She waits for the small singing waves, and her lips smile in the dusk. She knows I am coming. She can smell the lotus flower at her feet. She knows I am coming, and her hands grow warm with the rapid beating of her heart. Now, while it grows dark, beloved, this night I am not coming to you. This night I cannot come. Not this night, but tomorrow I shall be with you. Tomorrow, when it grows dusk, my boat will glide up the river through the singing waves. Tomorrow I shall be with you. He left off. He stared yearningly into the darkness. Then, as always, every evening, an old man by his side with the long snow white hair answered, Your beloved is dead. I sat and held her old hand in mine when she died. She was my mother. It must be more than 1,000 years ago now, but I remember it all as if it were yesterday. My dear, gentle mother. She never spoke of you, but when she was gone, I found a picture of you faded after many years. That time when I first came here to sit by your side. I recognized you from it. My mother was happy. My father was a good man. He took her when she was young, and she loved him with all her heart, for she realized that you were dead. She loved him all through a long and happy life. She had been dead a long time now. We are all dead now. Then turning toward him with eyes burning softly, the young man said, "You say my beloved is dead. My beloved is not dead. It is evening, and she sits by the river on the low bank with the smell of the lotus flower. There she waits for me, and it grows dark. She waits for the singing waves, and her lips smile in the dusk. She knows I am coming. She knows I am close at hand. What do you know about love?" The old man answered, "I am an old man. I lived so much longer than you who died in your earliest youth. I know that love isn't everything, but life is everything. Yes, life is everything. Now we are all dead," the young man said. "My whole life was love. My only deed was to love. Apart from that, I have not lived. And if I could live once more, my whole life would again be only this, to love her whom I have loved and still love. I should seek her by the river. I should seek her in the dusk where she waits for me. What do you know of love?" The old man answered, "I grew old, and I held her hand in mine when she died, my mother's small, wrinkled hand. What is love? What is life when we are all dead?" Then the young man turned away from him, but spoke quietly into the darkness with an ardent voice. "Beloved, this night I am not coming to you. This night I cannot come. But tomorrow I shall be with you. Tomorrow, when it grows dusk, my boat will glide up the river to you, who wait for me where the lotus flower sheds its scent. Beloved, tomorrow I shall be with you." So he spoke in the darkness. No one answered him any more. The old man sat sunk in his thoughts. Everything was empty and waste. But far away, from far down in the darkness, came a strangely drawn out, bellowing cry, infinitely plaintive, like a beast weeping. They all knew it, but they didn't know what it was. It was something that didn't belong with them. It was a man who had lived too long ago. He sat on his haunches. He had hair over his body. His nose was flattened, his mouth huge and half opened. No one knew who he was, not even himself. He didn't remember having lived. He only remembered a smell of a great forest of resin and wet moss, and a smell of another being, of something which was warm like him, something which was like him. He didn't remember that it was a human being. He only remembered the smell. Then he sniffed around him in the darkness with nostrils distended and bellowed like a beast weeping. It sounded horrible. It was such an agonizing wail of boundless sorrow and yearning that they shuddered, but he wasn't one of them. They lived their life seeking and seeking. They suffered and struggled, believed and doubted. They didn't bellow. No one spoke for a long while. It was desolate. It felt as if it were night around them and cold. But for two children, a boy of 12 and a girl who sat talking together without a pause, it was morning. For them, it was always morning. They had so much to talk about that they neither heard nor saw anything else, and everything was fresh and certain for them. The boy especially could describe everything between heaven and earth. He stumbled over himself. He was so bursting with things to say. The girl admired him boundlessly. It was incredible how much he knew, how much he had met with and seen, how much he had found to do, and how thrilling it had been all the time. He snared a pike in a lake in the summer in a rushy creek. The sun blazed, the grasshoppers scraped with their thighs. It was so quiet that you could hardly dare breathe. But there was a sucking when you lifted your feet because it was soggy. He snared such a lot that he could hardly manage to carry them home. Then he fried them for himself and for anyone else who was hungry. Sometimes there was enough for a whole house, the one he lived in. But when but he had a lot more to see to as well, although most of it had to do with the water. One Sunday in the winter, he had to pull out another boy who had gone through a hole in the ice before it was properly frozen. He was a good lad. It was well worth pulling him out. He was his best friend. He was sure to turn out well in time. So he got to know about the whole world. and decided to be a sailor and see everything and do everything. And once in springtime, he made himself a sailboat out of a plank and a shirt, one that he stole from his father because he was bigger. He was going over to the other side. It was blowing just right, with the water gray. It made him tingle all over. But out in the middle came a wind that he had not reckoned with. It upset the plank and he was gone. But it was thrilling the whole time, and anyhow, it was his own fault because he was clumsy with the sail. Yes, he had done any number of things, one sort and another. The girl listened to him with shining eyes. She was as proud and enraptured as he was. She egged him on with delighted exclamations and little wondering remarks. She constantly wanted more, and there was still more that he'd done. He had kept rabbits and had his own potato plot, which had to be looked after and turned over. He had gone in a train 20 miles by himself. He could tell which clouds came with the rain and which were only to look at. He knew when the sun rose. He had a gun too, and some days he would go shooting sparrows with it. That seemed rather cruel to her, though. But when he said it wasn't, because anyhow there were so many left, then she realized that he was right about that. He knew the names of all the animals and was able to imitate their cries and all the other sounds down on the earth. He knew all about the world, an incredible amount. She hadn't done very much herself. She'd only played hopscotch and picked flowers. She didn't know how to do anything else, but that didn't matter. Now she had him. She'd got to know just the same what great fun everything was. They were both happy. Things were all right for them, as they should be. There was such a lot that there was no danger that they would ever get to the end. They realized there was enough. The darkness around them shone with things they had brought with them. They were perfectly happy. A man said, "One morning, I went to put up fences for the animals who were to be turned out next day. It was early. I went through the birch meadows where I had played about as a child. They smelled of fresh leaves and the secret places for wild strawberries. I knew them all. I went along thinking about nothing. I went thinking about the trees and the openings between them. I recognized them. I went along thinking of her whom I loved, who sat at home in the farm waiting for me, and for our first child, whom she was soon to bring into the world. The birds were singing everywhere. The cuckoo was calling up on the hills where there were oaks. I thought about everything. I thought, I'll gather a few strawberries for them to eat at home tonight. Just as was just as I was going along, I heard something murmuring and muttering. It was the stream. I knew it well. I'd had a water wheel there when I was a boy. I went and walked a little way by the side of it. Some way up, I found the stones that I jammed the axle in between. They lay just as they used to. There was a lot of water this year. Good thing. The corn would be doing well. I thought of all the days in spring when I'd scrambled about on those stones. Then from farther down in the meadow, I heard some youngsters playing and went along to them for a bit. They were busy with a water wheel which had tin on the edges of the paddles. It wasn't finished yet. They looked up sweating. I said, "There used to be a better flow farther up." They said, "It's stronger here now." I looked on for a while. Then I went across the boggy patch up onto the path again. The sun struck warm already. I took some bark off a birch and made a basket and gathered it full of strawberries. I knew the places. I didn't care so much for strawberries myself anymore. It was for them at home. I came to our piece of land where my work was. I put down the basket in the grass. I pulled out the fencing that I'd carted there the week before and took some birch twigs for binding. For there wasn't much juniper on our land. The leaves smelled strong. I worked at my job while the sun mounted. I am thankful for a morning long ago. So he talked of it. His face was fresh and clear. One man sat thinking over what he had. He was a murderer. He had murdered a man. It had taken 50 years. He had to learn. First, there had been a long, long day, a brilliant, unending day. He worked in the sunshine. His work was to lay foundations. The day had no end. He loved a woman. She loved him. They had many children. He took them about in the woods. He taught them about all the trees, about the sea and clouds and stones. They got bigger. The sons grew up. They thought his way. The girls thought their mother's way. They all grew and increased. He got a big beard. The sons were bearded too and spoke gruffly like him. The girls were married and had children. The sons too. Everything increased, multiplied. There was more and more of everything. The sun shone and shone. It couldn't set. There was one whom he wanted to murder, but it was too light. He worked and worked. He was always happy. The day never came to an end. He grew bald. He bought himself a fur cap. There was one whom he wanted to murder. Then it grew dark at last. He crept out onto the road. Clouds were blowing across the sky. He crept across the fields. The other was in front of him the whole time. He stopped and listened, jumped the ditch, slipped into the wood. The branches crackled under him. He went on tiptoe. He crouched forward. He didn't breathe. The other was only a little ahead. The ground took a plunge downward. It became narrow, a narrow ravine. There was wind in the trees, pitch dark. The darkness felt good. He unbuttoned his chest. The ravine got narrower and narrower. It plunged down. There were slippery stones and wet leaves in between. He dropped down and crawled. He crawled so as not to be heard. The other was almost within touch. He was crawling too. He could hear him panting. He didn't breathe himself. He took a leap forward and got hold of him, hurled himself onto him. Then he stabbed him. He sat thinking. He sat here now thinking. He sunk his head in his hands, then lifted it slowly and looked around him questioning. The hairy one bellowed from far beneath. He remembered nothing. I lived on a strange earth, said one of them. It had fire in it. We lived on the soil and we were happy. We sowed and reaped as our parents had done, like our fathers in all ages. We grew wine and corn in the big valleys. We planted gray olive trees on the sloping hills. We understood the meaning of life. I will tell you what happened. There was a house by the mill. Guidita lived there. Almost everything I am going to tell you is about her. She was not unlike the other girls at home, but she was more beautiful than them all. When she went along the road with her basket on her head, the ground shone with gladness, and the swallows rode higher into the light, their wings, their wings at rest. There was always sun at home. There had been sun at home for as long as our people could remember. The sky was far off and high above us. At home there was nothing but earth. But Guadita was more than all else. When she went through the village on her big bare feet, she sang more cheerfully than the others. But in the evening, when the girls sat chattering and laughing round the well, she rested her head in her friend's lap and lay listening to them. Her breast was full and heavy. She smiled as if she were not yet happy. It was me she came to love. We loved each other like two children. We knew nothing about love. We sang and played together in the evenings. We climbed the old paths that ran steeply up the mountains where no one lived. We climbed so high that there were no more paths. Then once we got lost, it had grown dark. Out of a cleft in the mountain came a feeble light. There lay a little house of stone and mud, not like ours. We found our way there. We crouched in through the door. The house was cramped and low. You could hardly turn around in it. There was only one window, a square hole. It was set in one corner in the wall facing the valley. An old fire was flickering on the trodden earth floor. At first, we couldn't make out anything. Then we saw an ancient creature, a hunched woman, sooty and lean. She sat poking the fire. She was one-eyed. We have lost our way, we said. Yes, she replied, as if she knew it. I could see that she was not one of our people. It was oppressive and strange. I wanted to get away from it, down to the valley again, to sun and trees, to houses and people. I knew I could get there alone once it was light again. But Guadita sat down and stared like the old woman into the fire. She asked her who she was. The old woman said she was no one. Then you are not human? No, said the old woman. I keep watch over human beings. Guidita said, you shall read my future, and she held out her hand. She lay close to the fire. Her legs were red, her breasts were big and heavy. I knew how I loved her. I wanted to take her away, to rush her through the darkness with her down to the valley, to houses and people, to sun and trees. I knew I could get there alone, even in the dark, but she didn't hear or see me. The old woman took her hand and looked at it a long while. Then she said, "When you bear a child, you must die." Gudita drew her hand away slowly. I stood pale. I could feel that I was trembling. In a strange, submissive voice, Gudita asked, "Why must I die?" The old woman said, "In you life has grown full." We both went toward the door. Neither saw the other. We stood staring down at the fire. We asked the way home. The old woman described it for us. It was easy to find when she said it. We went out into the dark. We went along silently, side by side. We didn't hold each other's hand in the way we used to. I hadn't thought about life. I had only lived. I knew nothing of love. I listened for Guidita's steps in the dark. The path plunged steeply. Guidita stumbled over a stone. I put out my hand to steady her and touched her arm. I knew that I loved her and wanted to save her from all harm. We went farther and farther down the mountainside. It no longer dropped so steeply. We struck a path that I knew. Then it grew light. The whole valley was spread out broad and rich in front of us. The sun flooded it. It seemed endless. I breathed freely. I stood still for joy. I saw my father's house. I saw all the houses. I saw the trees and the birds, the whole of life. Then I thought I understood the meaning of everything, how great and light everything was. Gudita stood close beside me. Like me, she looked out over the valley, but her glance passed over everything, veiled and withdrawn. She drew close to me and kissed me passionately, with her arms heavy around my neck. I stood intoxicated. We had never kissed each other before. But when I looked down into her face, I was frightened and held her away from me. I knew how I loved her, how I would protect her, cherish her, how I would live my life with her, live forever. But then she struggled close to me with her whole body, tore her clothes away from her full breasts. They swelled milky. I breathed heavily. She bore me to the earth, gave up her body to me. I wanted only to live, only to live. She lay smiling. Her eyes grew dim and heavy. Life and death flowed together into eyes that saw nothing. We went on again in silence. We had not spoken to each other all the way home. My father's house was strange, strangely large and lit. I built myself another farther away. Guidita joined me. We lived together happily. That year there was more wine than usual, and more corn and more olives. I pruned the vine stalks bare, so that next year they should yield an even richer harvest. I plowed the fields black round our house. Guidita was with child. She walked slowly along the meadows. Next spring came, and she was to bear the child. It was a hot day in the middle of the day. She didn't cry out, she only struggled. When she had borne the child, she was dead. Her blood was too rich and fierce. It wanted her to die. I took the child in my arms. It was so small. I clutched it to my breast, looked around me alone. The whole house was silent, only myself. I stood crushed with heavy pain. Then a long way off, I heard a song, a monotonous, happy song that I recognized. I stood listening. With bent head, I went outside the door with the child held close to me. Through the valley came a slow procession. In front went a man carrying a symbol of the phallus on a pole. He carried it high in the sun. After him followed all the people singing. It was an old custom of our fathers for this day in the spring, in the time of fertilizing. I stood holding my child close to my breast. It was so small. I gazed and gazed at the great procession advanced. I thought it strange they should be keeping that feast today. The sun shone without end. They all sang the same monotonously happy song. I went to meet them across the fields. In the middle of the valley, they stopped. I stopped a little way from them. I was like a stranger. I gazed and gazed at all the people. I saw my father, I saw my mother, I saw them all, and I saw the trees and all the placid houses in the village, the whole of life. Then I thought I understood the meaning of everything. Then I understood that life wills only itself. It wills trees, it wills people, it wills flowers smelling on the earth, but not any one of them. Life has no love for you, tree. Life has no love for you, man. For you, flower, for you, waving grass, except when it means just you. When it no longer means you, it loves you no more, but blots you out. Then I understood the meaning of life. The sun shone. The sun shone as never before. It was charged with light and heat as never before. My head grew heavy, dazed. I stood with my child in my arms. It was still wet from its mother's womb. Dazed, I stood and joined in the happy, monotonous song, like my father and mother, like all people on the earth. Then the ground began to tremble under us. The mountains opened. Burning earth burst out of them, poured down toward us, down over the valley, engulfing all. The sky shook with the roar. Terror struck. I pressed the child to my breast, but I stood motionless, just waiting. And when I looked round, I saw all the people who were standing motionless. They were just waiting. It was as though they understood that they must die, but they sang their happy, monotonous song, the only thing they had. We were consumed by the burning earth. Now all that is empty desert, rocks that crumble, that turn to dust, sand circling in the fierce sun. He sat silent. Then he said quietly, I don't think life wills trees and people. I don't think life wills flowers and waving grass, except when it means just that. Otherwise, it would just as soon be nothing. Empty desert, sand circling in barren space. Then he stopped. They sat oppressed at the end of his story. Many struggled with what was not theirs, but no one had anything to say. Then at last a man spoke. He sat among the others, but it was not as if he were speaking to them. He was squatting, with his arms around his knees, motionless, but in his hand he held a staff like a wanderer. I am homesick for my country. I am homesick for the great desert where I was alone. I am homesick for my country which no foot has trodden, which no people has burdened with its roads. I am homesick for my country which has no bounds, for the burning sun which has no shade, for my sky which is waste and empty, which is red from the burning sand. I am homesick for my country where I wasted away and had to die. I am homesick for the great desert where I was alone. They listened to him wondering. They asked themselves who he was. They didn't know. But now, while they struggled in vain to overcome what had been said, another began to speak. His voice was slow and clear and infinitely gentle. I was the savior of mankind. My life was to suffer and die. My life was to teach mankind suffering and death, so deliver them from the gladness of life. I was a stranger on earth. Everything was for me so strangely distant. The trees never came near me. The mountains lingered far off from me. When I stood by the sea, its smell was as faint as the flowers. When I walked on the ground, it could not feel my step. No wind touched me. My clothes were motionless, still. All is appearance. All is waiting for what is. All is longing for what is. All is pain at living. I called God my Father. I knew He was my Father and that heaven was my home where He waited for me. I called distress my brother because it delivered me from life and from what is not. I called death my best friend who was to reunite me with Him who, for a few years of His eternity, had allowed me to live. I bore the sorrow for all that lives, and mankind nailed me on a cross where I had to suffer and die. Then I spoke to my Father. To him I cried out all my humble faith and love. To him I cried out the anguish of living and all that lives, the yearning of all that lives home to what is. And he covered me in darkness. He covered the whole earth in darkness in order to hide it from the eyes of the seeing. Then mankind bowed the knee around the cross. Then all mankind in the whole earth bowed the knee and hailed me as their Savior, him who delivered them from life and all that is not. It was empty and desolate the whole world over. I gave up my soul on the tree of the cross. He ceased, moved. They waited for his words. He said quietly, when I came here then, I had no farther. Father, I was a man like you. And the sorrow of life was not my sorrow. The sorrow of life was a happy sorrow. not what I bore. So he ended. But scarcely had he ceased before another began to speak in another voice. I was the savior of mankind. My whole life was sheer gladness. It smelled of earth. I did not come in order to save them. I saved them by coming. I taught them all the glory of life simply by living. I was born to rule over the whole earth. When I grew to youth, I rode through my country. It was in the summer. The day was luminous. All was close to me, all men, all trees, all flowers, all things on the ground. All was at one with me. Then I understood that life is all. There is nothing else. I took a woman. She bore me a son. He was like me. He too was for life. I gathered my people. I led them out to fight against others. I taught them all to live and die. We all fought in the sun. We, the conquerors. We, the conquered. We all saw the loveliness of life and how it had a beginning and an end. Heroes bled to death. The dead were forgotten for all the living. One morning, the war trumpets blew. I charged, I charged on my horse, far in front of my people without armor, but with gleaming weapons. A man thrust his sword into my breast. I drew it out and knew that I must die. Bloody, I went on fighting in order not to lose the last lovely hour of my life. I fought more mightily than ever in the brilliant sun. A youth came against me, arrogant as I struck him down. As he lay dying on the ground, he turned and gazed after me with a long, strange look. It was not hatred in his gloomy eyes, but he gazed with envy after one who was going toward life, while he had to leave all and die. I bared my breast and showed him my great open wound. He understood and died with a smile. And now, when I felt death approaching, I rode alone out of the battle and the clamor. With my bleeding wound, I rode along over the lovely ground. I saw the flowers and the trees. I saw the hills and all the roads. I saw all the bright villages in the valleys and the birds circling above them. All was so near me. All was at one with me. Then I understood that life was all, that there was nothing else. I died upright, gazing around me. He ceased, then he said, and yet, nevertheless, it was not all. And the gladness of life was not my gladness. The gladness of life was obscure and incomprehensible, not like mine. I was a man like all others. I had perceived nothing. When he had said this, there was heard a young singing voice, slender and timid, like a child's. I was the savior of mankind. I was born to tell them all, to reveal to them the innermost meaning of everything. Within me, I carried the hidden nature of life as others carry faith and doubt. When I thought about anything around me, I understood not only what I saw, but also all that I did not see. I came into a great room where everything was gathered together and where it was always light and still. Because it was light, I stayed there a little while. I was just a child. I didn't think much about what I possessed. I only carried it with me. But I felt my secret growing within me. Each morning it was with me, and there was sun upon the whole earth when I came out to play in the dewy grass under the trees. And I knew how everything stood waiting for me, how everything living stood waiting for me, everything happy and everything dejected, until some day I should utter what was mine, what smiling I possessed. I was only 14. Then I had to die. I carried the hidden nature of life within me. Therefore, I had to die. They listened dispiritedly to the childlike voice. They sat there silent and helpless in the dark. But one declared, as for me, I was head waiter at one of the biggest restaurants, known and frequented by all. It is a difficult and important position. It's a matter of understanding everybody's wishes and just what they want in order to have a pleasant time. I had an attractive personality, and everyone regarded me as well fitted for my post. I knew how to arrange things so as to make it pleasant. It's such small things that count, but they take a lot of finding out. A few flowers in a bowl, tables tastefully set, that may make all the difference. And service without a hitch, that's more important than almost anything. It's not easy. You must learn to understand people's wants and adapt yourself to them. I knew all that, and they had confidence in me. When they left, everyone declared that it had been very pleasant. I was indispensable, but I too had to go my way sometime, like everyone else. Then, of course, they had to find a new head waiter, for they can't get on without a head waiter. I hope he had an attractive personality so that they still have a pleasant time. Shaken to their very depths, they heard him to the end. Uncertainty and pain filled them as never before, harried them, and took all peace from them. They didn't know where to turn with their thought. They wandered about with it, found peace for it nowhere. At that, a man got up among them. It had never before happened in eternity that anyone had got up, that anyone had changed and become something different. They gazed at him, marveling. His face was passionate, as if it were burned with fire. His eyes flamed in the darkness. He didn't speak like the others. He spoke fiercely, his words coming vehemently, one after the other. What is truth? Tell us what is truth. This life that we live, it is only confusion, only riches without end. It is too much. It is too much. We cannot grasp it. We can only see the little that is our own, that which is too small. But all that is great is too great. We struggle and struggle, each by himself. We seek and seek, but nobody finds anyone but himself. We sit alone in an endless space. Our loneliness cries out in the darkness. We cannot be saved. There is too much of us. There is no way for us all to take. Then life is always just one of us? Is it never all of us? Something so certain that we can all lean our heads against it and be happy? Is it never simple and one and the same? Is it never simple like an old mother who says the same words to her children every day, but feels her love deeper and deeper every time? Is it never a home where we can all come together simply as one? Is it so great that we can never grasp it? Never, never in eternity? Only brood and brood each other over what is his own and see all the rest engulfed in a darkness where our minds can seize on nothing? I cannot endure life's being so great. I cannot endure its having no bounds. I cannot endure my loneliness in a space which has no end. I will seek God, seek what is always true. We will seek God to call him to account for this bewildering life. We will all gather together and set out and seek God to gain certainty. At last, they listened to him intently. He had spoken in a way that held them all. He had touched something in them all, something which each one now knew had lain hidden within himself also, and which hurt as soon as anyone touched it. They had not felt the misfortune of life so deeply before. Some had not felt it at all. Now at last they become conscious of everything. Now they all understood what helpless confusion life meant, how it was so much and so great that it gave peace to none of them, not even to the happy, not even to the richest, that for mankind it was without foundations, without solid ground to stand on, without truth. Now they understood how degrading it was for them to live as they did, without knowing, without really being able to believe. Now they understood to what desperate loneliness they were each of them doomed, surrounded by impenetrable darkness. And they understood that it must come to an end, that they must go seeking for something else, for something that was valid for them all, for light and certainty, for truth. But some thought, is there really a God? One said, is there really a God? I feel as if there isn't one for me. Another said, I too feel as if there isn't any God for me. The passionate one answered, one man cannot expect to have a God, but for us millions there must be one. When he had said this, they believed it and got up to follow him and called God to account for his incomprehensible life. They found it hard to get up. They had made themselves comfortable, each in his own way, for all eternity. It had never occurred to them to change. They got up with great effort and at first staggered a little in the darkness. But when they had gathered around him who was to lead them, they stood firm and close together like a body of men. in which there burns a holy fire. They felt that amid all the confusion and diversity, there was at last something holding them together, their misfortune, their bottomless misery. They felt the depths of their despair. They felt how it united them. They made themselves drunk with it. They felt as a vast power, as the vast power of man which forced its way out of the depths of his struggling soul. They made themselves drunk with it. The happy could not conceive how they could have been happy. The unhappy regretted not having been more happy. With the passionate one at their head, they set off to call God to account for everything. There were not many to begin with, not many by the standards of eternity, but on their way they gathered more and more, all the unnumbered who sat round about in the darkness. They came upon the clumps of people who were deliberating, one thing after another, one life after another. They came upon those who were quite silent, so that they were not noticed until you were standing among them. They came upon the lonely who sat apart, far off, cut off from everything. They gathered them all. They gathered happy and unhappy, rich and destitute, faithful and despairing, the strong and the weak, the submissive and the struggling, all who had lived. These all followed them when it became clear to them what the great pilgrimage was for, that it was for salvation from life's dreadful confusion and from man's loneliness and his boundless space. Then they all got up and silently joined the procession. The eyes of many burned with agitation and suffering. They united themselves in ecstasy with the others. Some drew themselves up slowly. In their faces there still shone the gleam of a secret joy. They joined the multitude, gazing into the far distance. They all got up and followed. At their head went the passionate one. He no longer spoke. He was only one of them, the one who led them on. But he carried his head high. He seemed a vast figure. Fire lit up his features. In life, he had been a shoemaker, sitting all the time. Now he was gathering all the living to lead them to God. He had sat shut up in a little workshop that smelled of wax and leather. There he had suffered his own life. Now he suffered the lives of all. They followed him as if he had been the misery they had known from the beginning of time. They saw themselves in him, their afflicted, shut in soul, which, when it got out of its prison, found everything foreign and desolate and cold, which yearned for home again, but no longer had a home, since it was no longer imprisoned, but homeless among all that is. And they thought, as this endless pilgrimage drew out longer, and as more and more multitudes gathered from all the parts of darkness, of how horrible life was, how horribly great, even greater than they had ever suspected. And they thought of God, of him who had laid on them this unimaginable burden, and who would now save them, give certainty and peace of how mighty he was, of how all embracing, and yet there burned deep down in his great hungering soul a small flame that warmed him amid his joyless riches, as a flickering candle warms the wanderer's hands at the end of all his wanderings in the empty desert where there are no more paths that he would give them. The multitudes grew and grew. They became immense. They became so immense that no thought could grasp them any longer. They surged like oceans whose coasts no one sees and no one guesses at. They seemed at last to stand still, great surging seas which felt only how everything was flowing in upon them. Everything lonely and struggling, everything confused and abandoned, everything seeking and seeking again, everything that had been. They were drunk with the sense that everything was being gathered and gathered to them until outside there would no longer be anything. It took hundreds of years, it took thousands of years. It was all so vast. Now the masses murmured as never before with all that was in them. They stirred and seethed powerfully, heavily. They broke against each other. They piled up. They flowed from one to the other, leveling themselves out, rose in other places, sank again. Then they became calmer and calmer. The outermost edge seemed to draw in a little, became fixed, no longer wavered, held firmly together like an iron band. land all that was within and received no more from the outside. Out there was only empty nothing. But now at last, when all that lived had been gathered together and had mingled with itself, like waves that mingle together with each other, a struggling sea grows quiet and motionless. Then gradually something strange happened, something which none of them had suspected. When it had grown quite quiet, they were seized with the sense of being one, not more than one. They felt that they belonged together. One thing fitted to the other. Everything fitted together. It was a whole, and the whole was so simple that they stood gazing around, staggered and bewildered. It was not complex. It was only great. It was not great. There was only much of it. Everyone discovered his own kind. It wasn't hard. It came of itself. After a little seeking, everyone found where he fitted in, where he had fellows. It all fell into place. Life seemed to be only a few kinds, but incredibly much of each kind. And when these kinds had each sorted themselves out, they formed together only one kind, which meant just the same thing. The exceptionally unhappy found the others who had been exceptionally unhappy. Those who were really happy found all the others who had really been happy. The believers found the believers, and the doubters found the doubters. The struggling found the others who had struggled. The dreamers, the others who had dreamed and yearned. The lovers, those who had loved. The bitter scoffers, those who had shut themselves up in bitter scoffing and contempt. The abandoned, the others who had been abandoned. The magnanimous, the magnanimous and the bandits had found the bandits, the great martyrs had found the great martyrs, the heroes, the swindlers, those who were nothing, those who were nothing. At first, there was a murmuring confusion in these vast, surging masses when everyone found his own home. Here swarmed hundreds of thousands who all looked just the same. You called to them, "Who are you?" They all replied with one voice, "We are Mr. Peterson, the grocer." Here swarmed an even more stupendous multitude. You shouted to them, "Who are you?" They all answered gloomily, "We are those who have a black spot on their nail." But when all had established themselves in their own place, the masses fitted together with no boundaries between them, marking only a boundless whole. And it gradually grew strange and quiet all around. Life didn't seem to be anything at all remarkable, only what it should be. Life seemed only to mean that they should all be and that they should fit together. It was a meaning so simple that there was nothing to be said about it. Nothing. There was no confusion. Everything was ordered and perfectly secure, exactly as it should be. There was no loneliness. No one was so queer that there were not several million just like him. There was no point in any despair, any unrest and hopelessness. Everything was in order. Everything was as it should be. They stood bewildered. A deep satisfaction, a deep gladness and thankfulness filled them. They gazed around them with slow glances. Everything was peaceful and quiet. Everything was one. They thought of how they had distressed themselves, how they had fumbled and sought, how they had suffered, how they had tormented themselves with anxiety and doubt, how they had dug deeper and deeper into themselves and not found any bottom, how they had groped ahead in the darkness to find just one who was their brother, just one, but it was too great and empty. All was too great, so vast that they could not grasp it. A deep gladness and satisfaction filled them now. They were like a man who has struggled all night with the gale. When at last the morning comes and the sea suddenly lies motionless, without wind, and daylight spreads out over the endless quiet. At first lit up with happiness, he feels that he has saved his life and that all is serenity and light. But then, when his eyes have searched the endless sea again, and again he is gripped by desolation of all that lies motionless around him, and by the desolation in his heart, where there is no longer peril and darkness, only certainty and security. So with them, they were gradually gripped by the desolation in what they saw. and what they had found to be the certain and the true. All was so simple and uniform. All was so light and perfectly comprehensible. All was just as they longed and longed as all their lives for it to be. They had nothing to struggle for, nothing to suffer, nothing. They stood disheartened. They stood irresolute and didn't know what to do with themselves, which way to turn. What had been theirs no longer existed. No anguish filled them, nothing. No unrest drove them on. All was complete and ended. All was as it should be. They no longer had any reason to seek out God. They understood it all themselves. There was hardly anything to understand. It only what was. A dull silence spread over them. It was gloomy and empty. Then a man got up among them and spoke to them all in a hoarse but piercing voice. He was small and doubled up, but he got bigger when he drew himself up. His face was fine and slender in shape, and when he spoke, it quivered with a fierce inner glow. What then am I? What then am I? This life which we struggle in and suffer, which weighs upon us like a darkness, where we are lost, which we feel our way through by anxious thought, groping and groping ahead to find at last what the truth is for each of us. This then is nothing but an unchanging repetition through the ages. It is nothing but the same over and over again, nothing but one and the same, continuously the same poor simple meaning, the same certainty, the same nothing. We struggle and struggle, and then it is nothing. We tear open our breasts, and then there is nothing but a heart which will live and die like thousands more before it, after it. We feel a holy fire burning within us great and mightily, and then it is only the fire that is required to keep us going, the warmth of our bed to save us from freezing. Poor wretches, and come to an end. So that's the reason for it all. Only that we should not come to an end. That we should never come to an end, never come to an end. And when our evening is drawing in, we are brought back like great fat cows who have each grazed its own bit of the sunny earth and are driven together, each into its stall. And all that we leave behind us is the manure for next year's grass, our manure as good from the one as from the other. I am weighed down to the earth with shame. I rise up in disgust and hatred. This life, which is only an imposture, which is one long insult to all that I have felt holiest within me. This life, which is so simple and small that it is humiliating to live. No confusion, no sorrow, no misery, no bleeding wound, no quivering heart which never finds peace. Nothing. Everything that for us gave life its richness and pain, which filled us with anxiety and groping unrest, with yearning without end, that is nothing. All that is something other than myself. I was alone. I was one in despair who never found peace. I was one without a home who went on seeking and never found. What am I now? Nothing. I am alone no more. I am nothing. No one is alone by himself. No one sets out alone on a road which has never been taken before, which is blotted out behind him. No one is alone with his heart bleeding to death, growing silent in a darkness where no one listens. I am not alone. I shall never be again. All is empty, all in vain. If a man moves his hand out to the right, then slowly to his breast, where he draws a cross, then up sideways into the air, that means nothing, then puts his finger to his lips, as if sealing them, draws an invisible circle above his head, and after that raises his finger and points toward a hidden star far off in space, which he cannot see, only feels is there, yet tens of thousands have done the same before him, even if only as I now, in order to be alone in something amid life's emptiness and nothingness. It is horrible. It is horrible. I rise up in flaming hate. I rise up burning with hate against him who insults my holiest possession. I seek God. We will seek out God to call him to account for the poverty of life. We will seek God to accuse him of life's insult to man, of its certainty, its one poor truth. We will seek God to demand of him the confusion and the doubt, the soul's longing that nothing can still, to demand of him his boundlessness, his anguish, his space without end. They listened to him without rising excitement. His hatred infected them. They felt that within them too it lay fermenting. Within them all it grew stronger and stronger. It surged out over the illimitable multitudes, passed on by each of them. They saw his fine quivering face. It was their face, a prayer for pain and throbbing unrest, for the soul's loneliness that nothing can redeem. They understood the brutality of life, its brutal gladness that wanted to rob them of everything. All around they began to cry, "We will seek God." Farther and farther away they began to cry, "We will seek God to call him to account for the certainty and serenity of life, to demand of him all the anguish, all the darkness, all the depths of the abyss, all that we cannot grasp." Then, thousand voiced, as if from vast struggling seas, there rose a great roar. "We will seek God to call him to account for everything." Slowly they began to move, the spiritual man at their head leading them. It was a strange journey. The immense multitudes, now greater than ever, rolled forward, spending all their strength. They rolled on so slowly and heavily that their emotion grew deeper and deeper. Their souls were filled with a glowing mystic faith in the greatness of what they were undertaking. They went on and on. They did not arrive. They went on and on, hundreds of years, thousands of years. They did not arrive. Then they thought how tremendous this was that they were doing. They thought how incredibly vast they were, how incredibly vast they were was their poverty rolling away toward him who possessed everything. They thought of God, how he lay jealously brooding over his treasure, cruel, demoniac, leaving for the swarming life which he had created only a tiny scrap of incomprehensible nature, a poor morsel of bread, a little gladness and peace, a little certainty and warmth giving sun. They thought with mingled horror and exultant vengefulness how they would soon stand face to face with him. They did not arrive. The way to God seemed infinitely long. The spiritual man himself could not find it. All the noblest had to come to the front in order to try together to find the right way. They were dignified and serious men. But now, roused in their innermost being, they advanced with tight shut mouths, which betrayed nothing. Though their faces were flushed, overwrought, they scanned and scanned the darkness around them. Behind them followed all the others, patiently waiting and waiting, sometimes stretching up to try to look over and ahead of them. Then again, merely following them, going on and on. All around them was nothing but desolation and emptiness. They did not arrive. Then at last they saw far off a feeble light. It shone steadily, but so feebly that it could scarcely be distinguished amid all the darkness. They made for it. They thought it. It is a sea of light, but far away from us. In the end, after many years more, they began to approach it. It was a little lantern with dusty glasses, casting a quiet light around it. Under it stood an old man, sawing wood. They could see it was God. He was bent and short, but strongly built. His hands were rough, like those of a man who has worked all his life long at one and the same thing without resting. His face was furrowed, full of toil and a mild seriousness. He didn't notice them. They came to a halt. They stopped, struck with amazement before him. They stared and stared at him and could take nothing in. Those who were far off stood on tiptoe so that they too could see. A murmur went from man to man, a duller and duller murmur. Right in front stood all the noblest of them, men with spiritual features, faces quivering with the soul's most secret life. Their eyes blazed with holy indignation. "You are God," they began in a trembling voice. "It is you who are God." The old man looked up at them, confused. He made no reply, but moved his head in assent. You stand there sawing wood, they said. He made no reply. He wiped his mouth with the back of his rough hand, looking about him timidly. We are the living, they said. We are the life which you have brought forth. We are all the living who have struggled and struggled, who have suffered and suffered. We have doubted and believed, who have groped on through the darkness where nobody can find his way, who have sought and sought known glimpses and yearning, who have reached out searching to the farthest point of our nature's outermost limits, who have torn the heart out from our breasts and cast it beyond the limit to bleed to death in the nameless pains of loneliness. What have you meant by us? The old man stood perplexed and troubled. It was as if he had only now fully understand what it was about and who they were. He raised the frightened eyes of a recluse and gazed out over the surging sea of men who stood before him. His glance strayed about. There was no end to them. Wherever he might look, there was no end. It was illimitable, man by man, millions and millions again. There was no end. He returned to himself. He stood timid and awkward, not looking up. He put the saw aside. His clothes were old and worn. It was more noticeable now. He passed his hands through his lank gray hair, let his arms sink again. When he didn't have his work, it was as if he didn't know what to do with his hands. I am a simple man, he began, at last in a submissive voice. We can see that, said the leaders. Yes, we can see that, said all the others, all the millions of millions, as far away as you could imagine. The old man got even more confused. He stood before them humble, weighed down by their words. I didn't intend life as anything remarkable. He went on submissively as before. A shudder passed through the leaders. Nothing remarkable! Nothing remarkable! They burst out, their eyes blazing. It is horrible! Nothing remarkable, sounded from the millions of millions. Listen, listen to that. Nothing remarkable. It is horrible, horrible. The old man seemed overwhelmed by them. He fumbled with his large hands. His old head was bent still more. You could see how he suffered and struggled. At last, he seemed to collect himself, withdrawing completely into himself. I have done the best I could, he said quietly. There was something touching in his simple answer, in his inability to stand up against them. The leaders felt it, but they went on speaking just as sternly and severely. You have hurled us down into pain and torment. You have hurled us down into anguish and agonizing unrest, into nameless abysses. You have left us. You have let us suffer and suffer. You have let us sink under our burden, under our misery, dragging us on. You have vouchsafed us the intimation that in suffering our life became great and precious, precious to eternity and God. You have let us languish, despair, perish. Why? Why? The old man answered quietly, I have done the best I could. You have given us sun and gladness. You have let us be drunk with the loveliness of life, with the loveliness of morning, when the dew wets our feet, and all the trees smell, and all the flowers and all the hills. You have let us know the earth's happiness, that our home was there, that our home was the flowering earth. You have vouchsafed us the intimation that life was gladness, only radiant light, only morning and morning again. Why? Why? He answered quietly, I have done the best I could. They went on. You have not believed in the one nor in the other. You have just seen that in this way it would fit together, that in this way it would work. All you have wanted is that life should manage to keep going and that it never need come to an end. All you have wanted is life, nothing more, only life over and over again to no purpose. Why? Why? He answered quietly, I have done the best I could. At this unchanging answer, they were at a loss. Something submissive and touching in it, repeated like that by the old man, made them stand silent for a while and collect themselves before they could go on. But soon their passion burst forth again, strong, irresistible. But what did you mean by it all then? You must have meant something. What did you intend by this that you set going, by all this unimaginable life? We must demand a complete understanding of everything and also the confusion which is in everything. We must demand certainty about our radiant joy, about our right to light, about our happiness, and also the certainty that there is no joy. We must demand the deepest abysses of anguish, our suffering, which nobody can grasp, our anguish, our darkness, where we languish and die, and also the certainty that there is no cause for anguish. We must demand coherence in everything, peace for our thought, for our tormented, struggling heart. And also, we must demand that there shall be no coherence, no rest, no peace. We demand everything. The old man listened to them calmer than before. Outwardly, he was not changed, and yet seemed different, though just as humble as before. I am a simple man, he said, looking at them. I have worked untiringly. I have stood by my work day after day for as long as I know. I have demanded nothing, neither joy nor sorrow, neither faith nor doubt, nothing. I only intended that you need never be content with nothing. This sent a stab through the hearts of all the leaders. They met his calm glance, so unlike their own ardor. They looked at him, and he seemed to them to grow. He became great, so great that they could scarcely grasp him any longer. And yet he was so near to them. They grew quiet, silent. Something warm rose within them, something unknown and new. Their eyes became moist. They couldn't speak. But all the millions of millions, all those who stood behind them and who had not been able to catch the old man's words, among them the unrest continued, as violent as before, even more violent. They somehow gathered that the old man was being stubborn, wouldn't come out with the truth, and all their bitterness welled up. They must get their way with the obstinate old man. But they noticed that the leaders do not no longer speak for them. They had given up the struggle. They had abandoned them. They didn't care about their salvation, their distress. They would have to fight out the whole struggle for themselves, although they had no other weapon than their bleeding breast. Among them there stood an immense crowd of little children who had been playing and passing away the time as well as they could during the long journey, which they didn't know the meaning of. These they chose to plead the cause of this horrible life. These they brought up before God. And they all cried bitterly and sternly. What did you intend by these, then? What do you intend by these innocent children? The children at first stood ill at ease, looking around them. They didn't know what they had to do. They didn't understand what they'd been told. They stood uncertain and looked at each other. Then they gathered around the old man. Two of the smallest went up to him and stretched out their arms. He sat down. They climbed up to his knees. They looked into his big, horny hand. They poked with their small forefingers in his beard, on his old mouth. They thought he was a nice old uncle and pressed against him so that he should put his arm around them. Big tears welled up in the old man's eyes. He stroked their heads with careful, stiff fingers that trembled. By them I meant nothing, he said, so quietly that they could all hear. I was only happy then. Everyone's eyes filled with tears. They stood looking at God with all the children around him. Every breast grew warm and full. The men tried to keep back what they felt. The women sobbed aloud. Every mother among the unnumbered multitude saw that it was her child who was sitting on God's knee, whose head he patted, and she wept, but subdued softly from joy. It was quite quiet. Only the weeping could be heard. They all stood and felt deeply and secretly their intimate oneness with God. They realized that He was like them, only deeper and more than they. They did not quite understand, only felt it all. A miracle had come upon them. They all felt who He was, the noble after He had spoken, the people of simple feeling who couldn't afford to be noble. After what had happened with the children, no one spoke anymore. They had nothing they could say, and they were silent not from sadness, but because their hearts were too full. They were silent that they might feel and grasp everything. They were silent that there might be complete stillness. They went out of themselves in order to be with what had happened to them. Gradually, the weeping ceased. Gentleness and peace came over them, as it does a shower in summer, when the earth lies damp in the sun, clearer and as if nearer than before. and they understood that their visit to God was fulfilled. Yet for a while they remained lingering with what had happened. Then at last they turned around in silence, beginning the journey back. Once more they looked toward the old man who remained there. Then they raised their eyes to the darkness before them. The children didn't want to be apart from God. They liked being with him. But he patted them on their cheek and told them to go with mother and father and trust them. And they did as he told them. He stood alone, gazing after them, serious and happy. And he vanished from their sight. The feeble light was hidden away in the darkness. Mankind went on and on once more, but the vast seas no longer surged in unrest. They had found peace. The hosts advanced slowly through the darkness. All hands were raised, all eyes open. Silent and thoughtful they advanced. What they had experienced with God was gathered together and fell into place for them. The secret was mingled with the manifest. Then the secret sank down to the depths of their soul. Well, what was manifest was spread transparent above it. Each thought of what was his. Each one was alone with himself. But while they were thinking, they felt their oneness with all the others. While they were by themselves, they felt they were all among the others. Slowly and imperceptibly, as they advanced together, they were collected within them, as if in different vessels, something that was the same for all. And they carried it proudly or humbly. They carried it in vessels of a noble form, which made the bearers noble as well, or in one of those country pots of clay in which the peasant women fetch water from up in the hills, when the wells down in the village have dried up in summer. They carried their wealth, it was the same for all. They were all slowly filled with the same perfect inner certainty, faith, and light. Then they began to speak, each of what was his, but turning to the others, that they might hear and believe. They spoke to each other as brothers, simply and quietly, one by one as something ripened and came to certainty within him. They spoke to each other as before, only more quietly than before. They no longer had so many words, nor so great. They didn't give the whole of their inner selves. They gave only their faith, that which belonged to all. This they offered each other with open hands. There walked an old man. His head was aged, but he looked straight ahead as if a long way still remained for him. He said, I acknowledge you, dear life, as the one thing conceivable among all that is inconceivable. And he walked among the others, holding silence, listening. And century was added to century, millennium to millennium, age to age. They knew nothing of that. They only walked ahead side by side. Another said far off from him, I allow that life can be good and evil. I thank it for everything. I thank it for darkness and light, for doubt and belief, for evening and morning. In me it is the one, in my brothers everything else. Another, who had lived shut up in himself, but now walked in freedom as one among them all, said, and he found this his strength and peace. Any real life is disheartening because it gives only itself, because its limit is fixed and closed, because the clearer its limit, the more it suggests what lies beyond in the immensity of it. And yet I know now that I have found peace, that only within narrow limits can man experience what is greatest. Another said, I am grateful for my unrest, which has given me peace. I am grateful for my anguish, which has shown me it is not myself. The sea at rest need not hear the gale to know that it is vast and deep. So they talked among themselves. But one said, the shepherd watched his flock up on the hill, while inside it began to bubble and boil with lava and destructive forces. He knew nothing of what was happening there, and so he was calm. He drove on the flock in the sun and rested with his staff on the ground while he looked about him. Then, in spite of everything, when the catastrophe occurred, he somehow understood that too. He spread out his arms in the air and shouted at the top of his voice like a madman. That too he had within him. Neither the one nor the other was wholly himself. But when later on he watched new flocks on new hills, which he knew just as little about, he rested his staff on the ground with a new sense of security while he looked around him in the sun and smiled. They listened to him and felt the same as he, only a thousandfold. It was something they all possessed in common. And after a while, one among them began to speak. There was something fine in his voice, something humble. Perhaps there is something other than us. Perhaps there is something other than living. But of that I know nothing. It is not me. We sense everything, but we exist in what is ourselves. And one of them said, if our existence had no basis, we ourselves would have to lay the foundations of it. Fools and madmen would say that we are building on empty nothing. We men would only build and have faith, and the foundation would rest immovably on what we had built upon. For there is nothing. So they talked among themselves. And they thought of God, of how he stood over there by the eternal light of his little lantern. And they were filled with security. They went on into the darkness. Behind them followed all the little children, chattering and laughing, running around each other. They had invented new games to make the time go quickly, and now they played them together while the grown ups thought about everything. Another said, the wealth of life is boundless. The wealth of life is as great as we can grasp. Can we ask for more? Well, nevertheless, we do ask for more than all the incomprehensible exists as well, all that we cannot grasp. As soon as we are able to reach out our hands for something, as soon as we get the feeling that something is, immediately it is. Can we ask for more? They were filled with gladness at these words. They walked in silence, all the gladness and wealth within them. They went on and on in the darkness without speaking, strong and free. At last, humbly and quietly, one of them said, it is mankind's duty to be happy. And these words seemed to them to carry the whole of their faith. Simple as they were, they moved them deeply. They advanced in silence, thinking with a secret light in their faces. But one of them said, we are not happy in the way the poor and miserable ask to be. We are happy in the way that man is happy when he is occupied with living his life. And again another, one must take pain seriously over joy. A man should bury his grief in an ocean of light, and everyone will see that all the light is streaming from this one little grief, as if from a luminous gem, wrenched with toil out of the dark mountains. So they thought seriously about their happiness, but one whose voice was much more radiant than theirs then spoke. A man who bore an almost crushing sorrow, and who struggled heroically with life, but came near to being defeated by it, saw as he passed a house on the road a 2-year-old child sitting in the sand and playing with the dog. The dog was only a puppy and waddled clumsily about on its big paws. It pushed its wrinkled muzzle into the child's back. He shrieked with delight each time, clapping his small hands in rapture. He sat waiting without looking around, and when the dog nudged him again, his eyes shone in the sunlight. A little way off stood a young woman, looking on, as happy as the child. The man had stopped and smiled. It looked so funny. But when he smiled for their sake too, so that they should know that he thought they were happy, then he continued on his way. What had happened had no connection with his struggle in his life, and he forgot it. But without his knowing it, the trivial interruption still lingered within him. And when he gave himself up again to his sorrow, and went on thinking out his bitter struggle, he was smiling, even while he thought. Another said next, it is a fact that a hunchback is born into the world every minute. It seems, therefore, that there exists in the race a definite need to be, in part, hunchbacked. At the time when I lived, there were some who discovered this, and they understood through it the whole abysmal cruelty and misery of life. And they preached the deep despair to mankind as the one truth and greatness, the one salvation, the one thing that could raise them to something higher and nobler and bring them a bitter peace. Nevertheless, however fervently they taught their faith, there were none the more hunchbacks born into the world for that. Only one a minute as before, and in despair even over that, they had at last to give up and try instead to be happy. So they talked among themselves. Each found in the depths of his soul something to offer, something of light and goodness, and they listened to each other, together building up their faith. The millions went on and on. They advanced, vast, unimaginable, in the darkness. But no darkness existed for them. They began to approach the place where they had first gathered, together where they now must separate again. The time for leave taking came upon them. Then, while the others kept silent, the aged man again raised his whitened head and said, looking before him as if a long way still remained for him, I acknowledge you, dear life, as the one thing conceivable among all that is inconceivable. After that, no one said anything anymore. What needed saying seemed to them to be said. Nothing was left but all the richness in them which their thought could not embrace. They hid it secretly within themselves. Without speaking, they parted from each other to return each to his own place, to go on living. Wow, wow, wow. What a wild, magical story. I had to share that with you guys. When I read that when I was stuck in an airport for 31 hours, traveling home from Chicago. And it absolutely blew my mind. Absolutely blew my mind. Thinking about the process of life and death, and seeing God as nothing more than another man, and seeing life as nothing more than the experience of humanity trying to make sense of it, and nothing separate, right? We are all just life knowing itself, going through it all. Wild, truly wild. Well, guys, since that was a much longer story, I'm not going to do any divination this evening. So I hope you understand. And I hope you really appreciated the beautiful, beautiful work. And please go check out more from the incredible author, Lagerkvist. Really amazing work. One of these authors that just, I don't know, blow my mind every time. So meditate upon that and think, right? And remember that all life is beautiful and that we're all into this together. We're all separate and one, struggling to know. And that's beautiful. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing this beautiful evening with me. And I hope I will see you guys bright and early tomorrow. And we will begin our proper tarot then. But I had to share with you this truly profound story. All right. Thank you, everyone. Peace and love, and take care. Until next time. We cry out in loving adoration to the great mother, the twins, and the muses, the one, duality, and generation. And we ask the muses to sing in us the songs of inspiration, to guide us in our daily wanderings, and to teach us to listen and perceive with reasoned clarity. Peace and love, and take care.